Welcome into the Pro Football Network live stream. It's time to talk draft. The draft is just over 1 week away. There's so many rumors and it's speculation flying around. It's time to see how this round one is going to turn out. My name is Dallas Robinson. I'm an NFL writer here at Pro Football Network. Joining me on this stream is really the only person who could, Mr. Ian Cummings. He knows everything about the draft. He's as well prepared as anybody on these prospects. Ian, how's it going? What are we, 8 days away here from round one? How is your pre-draft process going, my friend?
It's going good. It's going even better now that we have the light at the end of the tunnel, right? It's so long, the process, that sometimes like, is it ever going to end? But now we've only got 8 days left. So the more you think about it, we've been doing mock drafts this entire cycle. We only have a little more than a week to do mock drafts, right? We only have a little more than a week to explore different outcomes and possibilities. So we got to make the most of our time. And that's what we're doing today with this live mock. It's very exciting. This draft in particular, right? I've only been doing 3 or 4 full time, but this is one of the more unpredictable classes that I can remember in the top 10. And then even beyond that, we know what happens from 11 to 32 kind of precipitates off of the top 10, right? So a lot of domino effect potential in this one. I'm very excited to talk about it and be here with you today talking about it and the NFL implications.
Yeah, it feels like there's so much that could happen, like you said, not just in the top 10, but throughout the draft with teams that need quarterbacks and these wide receivers that could come off early. It feels much more unpredictable than it has in years past. So let's go ahead and dive in here. We're on the Pro Football Network Mock Draft Simulator. It's, obviously we work for PFN. We prefer this mock draft simulator. In my honest opinion, it's the best in the business. It is so easy to use. It's got excellent scouting reports in here for every player that Ian and the rest of our PFN scouting staff have worked tirelessly on. You've got height, weight, you've got RAS scores, athletic scores here at the top, strengths and weaknesses. You can sort by different position groups. In my opinion, it's the best in the business. I use this far too often, Ian. I'm sure you do too. It's probably not good for my mental health how often I do these mock drafts, but man, are they fun and man, are they illuminating too.
Yeah, for sure. I'll wake up on a Sunday morning and just fire it up. And then I'm like, wait a minute, I'm off the clock. Ian, what are you doing? Stop. But it's already, it's too late by that point. So it's a very fun tool to explore different outcomes. That's exactly what we're doing. We don't know what's going to happen. So to make sure you cover all your bases and, every sort of valuation that you have for a prospect, this does a great job of exploring that and kind of making sure that you cast a very wide net. So it's been a fun tool. It's been very fun to work on. I want to give a shout out to Math Bomb, Kent Lee Platty on Twitter. He is the mastermind behind the MDS, all of the valuations, the trade logic, right? The algorithms that go into creating this. He's the one, and he's done such a great job with, constructing this. It's a very fun tool to use, and I'm excited to see what we can do with it in the months to come. But for now, we've got a very, very comprehensive database on the 2024 class. So let's get right into it. Let's see what we can do with this one.
Let's dive in. The number one pick, I feel it's kind of anticlimactic right here at the number one pick. Everyone knows Caleb Williams is going to go number one. He's been projected to go number one for years now, right, Ian? I mean, it's not going to be a surprise when he goes number one. But what do you like specifically about his fit in Chicago? They've added Keenan Allen, they've added DeAndre Swift, they've really built up that offensive line. They've added Shane Waldron as the new offensive coordinator. It feels like they've got all the pieces in place. They've just been waiting for someone like Caleb Williams to come along.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest knocks in the whole Justin Fields saga, right? And Justin Fields didn't prove himself to be the guy, right? Like there's a reason that they ended up trading him, but at the same time, you could make the argument that they could have supported him better. You're not going to be able to make that argument with Caleb Williams. They traded for Keenan Allen. They have DJ Moore, right? They've beefed up the offensive line, and you have Braxton Jones and Darnell Wright, who are still young tackles, but they're talented. They got upside, and we've seen speculation that they could spend number 9 on an offensive tackle too, right? So there's opportunities even with that pick to keep supporting him, but you've got the talent around him, the weapons core. You've got a solid offensive line, ideally maybe target a center at some point, maybe at 75, because Coleman Shelton, right? He's a solid starter, but can he be more than that? We don't know, but the defense is looking really good. They re-signed Jalen Johnson. They got Montez Sweat via trade, who has been phenomenal. They got a young DT core. They got great linebacking play. They got Jaquan Brisker, Kevin Byard through free agency. Everything is set for a guy like Caleb Williams to come in and take this thing to the next level right on day one. And I think Caleb, what makes him so special as a prospect is that creation ability, that magic off script, right? We've talked about it before. The arm elasticity, the angle freedom, and the velocity, the torquing freedom, even rolling left, right? Against his dominant hand, he can make some crazy throws. Those are the highlight plays. But I think even beyond that, in structure on RPO looks, he's very, very efficient. He's got clean mechanics. He's accurate in the short range. I think people overlook how high his floor is because that high volatility play style that he has off script is so compelling. Like it's what draws your attention. But you've got clean mechanics, RPO, short range rhythm throws, and you've got that playmaking upside. To me, he checks every box. He's my QB 1B, and we'll get to that a little bit later. But, he's one of the highest QB prospects that I've ever graded. So for Chicago, I think it's a perfect opportunity to get a compelling franchise QB and also maximize his traits.
Let's take Caleb at number one. I think that's what we're all expecting. Number two, I mean, it feels like it's been decided here at number two, but anything could really happen here, Ian. You mentioned above that Caleb Williams is not necessarily your number one quarterback. That might be Drake Maye that we'll get into here in a little bit, but it sounds like Washington at number two has made up their mind, and it's probably not going to be Drake Maye, who a lot of people have as a number two quarterback. It sounds like they're going to go in a different direction here.
Yeah, there's been a lot of smoke about Jayden Daniels at Washington. And Jayden Daniels is my QB3. I have Maye over him. I have Maye and Williams neck and neck at 1 and 2 on my board. I'm a big fan of Maye. I think, everything that he brings to the table from a talent perspective, right? But then also the flashes of anticipation over the middle of the field, DB manipulation, right? Having his feet in one spot, his shoulders in another, and displacing DBs so that he can open up windows for himself and capitalize with that high-level arm talent. To me, there's no box that he doesn't check. I think he has the highest ceiling in the entire class, and there's a really good operational floor to work with if he can clean up his mechanics a little bit. But Jayden Daniels, I want to play devil's advocate because I think he's definitely worth consideration in number two, and I think he'd be a great scheme fit, right? Cliff Kingsbury, spread-derived offense from his days at Arizona and USC and Texas Tech, right? A guy who's very comfortable using 4 or 5 wide receiver sets to spread the field. And that allows Jayden Daniels to do two things that he does very well. Test the defense vertically with that deep passing ability, that touch, that accuracy, but then also test defenses as a runner with his speed, agility, explosiveness, right? And his fearlessness. There are some times he's a little leaner, and there are some times you're like, all right, Jayden, don't jump into that crowd of 3 defenders, right? Preserve yourself. But, more often than not, he's a measured decision maker who I think has the accuracy, the playmaking ability to be a two-phase big play threat. And in Cliff Kingsbury's offense with the deep threats that they have, it could be a very fun pairing. So I would pick Drake Maye, but I can understand the reasoning behind Jayden Daniels, and I think that's what it's leaning towards. So we'll go with Jayden here.
Yeah, everything you hear sounds like it's Jayden Daniels. Adam Schefter told Washington fans to go print the Jayden Daniels jersey. So I feel like that's pretty confident that he's going to be the pick there at number two. I think at number three is where things kind of really open up here, though, because we don't know what the Patriots are going to do. It seemed like, from comments that Gerard Mayo made earlier this offseason, that they were certainly going to go quarterback, and maybe that's the way they will go. I think you can also look at this roster and say, is this Patriots offensive environment and offensive depth chart ready to drop a quarterback into this environment, or should they trade back? Should they take a different player, a skill position player here at the top? I think there are ways they can go, but clearly the Patriots need a quarterback at some point.
Yeah, they need a quarterback. And I think if you have the opportunity to pick a guy like Drake Maye without trading up and giving up extra capital, you have to capitalize on that. I mean, he's my QB1 personally. And again, it's very close. Him and Williams are essentially tied for me. But, I feel like the consensus is trending towards him falling down the board a little bit. And I can understand why there's some reservation around his game. The volatility with his mechanics, right? I think it's more of a mechanical congruence issue with his base width. There are times where his footwork, his feet will be a little too close together, a little wide, and that can impact his release point with his shoulders and his shoulder alignment, right? And that can impact situational precision, especially off platform as well. So, I think those are instances where he can improve. And then, like any young QB, there are lapses in decision making in high pressure situations. But I just go back to, and 2022 had a lot of these moments as well. I think 2023 had some very nice games. Georgia Tech was one example. He had some really good moments down the stretch against Duke. But 2022, you saw a little more consistency. And I think part of that was lost a few pieces on the offensive line. Josh Downs was a really impressive playmaker. Antoine Green lost those two, and then didn't have Tez Walker for part of the 2023 season. But across 2022 and 2023, I think we saw, first off, a hyper elite physical talent. This dude is 6'4", 220, and he can run like Josh Allen in open space. He's got that foot speed, that pace of his stride frequency, and then he can hurdle guys. You've seen that. Again, you don't want him to do it as often at the NFL level because, again, preserve yourself, be smart. But the athleticism is there. I think the off-platform throwing ability is so impressive for a player of his size. A lot of times taller guys are a little bit stiffer and they're not great off-platform. Michael Penix is one we see in this class where sometimes his hips can get locked up and he's not great at keeping his shoulders aligned. But with Drake Maye, he's such a fluid mover off script, and even going to his left, again, he can torque his shoulders going full speed and throw a laser leading his receiver over the middle of the field. Inside the pocket too, there are some really bright flashes of pocket management, stepping up, kind of sidestepping and sliding away from pressure to keep yourself clean and give yourself time. And then he can multitask, process the field, displace defenders with his eyes, and capitalize. So the mechanical flaws, particularly with this lower body, can improve, and I want him to improve on that. But I think about his fit with Alex Van Pelt in New England, right? Van Pelt did a lot of great work with Joe Flacco down the stretch last year in Cleveland, right? And you think about what they have similarities, right? Big armed passers who can test the defense vertically. If you have a seam ball from the slot and then a corner route, Drake Maye can put that defender in conflict with his eyes and capitalize with his arm. But I think Drake Maye is a superlative athlete at his size too. So he can be a running threat off platform. The upside is unmatched. And I think, that situation, that supporting cast is not great, like you said. So you got to use that 34th pick, I think, in a tackle or a wide receiver. You've got to bolster that supporting cast. But if you can, Drake Maye to me is very much worth the risk, and he's not worth passing on with a trade down. I think you have to capitalize on that opportunity.
Yeah, I think you can see the argument for saying, okay, we don't want to put Drake Maye into this kind of moribund offense and break him, right? We don't want to look 2 years from now and say he had no success at all and he's just not going to move forward as an NFL quarterback. But you're right. I think that you can't pass off this opportunity at the top of the draft. And he's your quarterback one. So for you, this is an absolute home run, like pick at number 3, right? Yeah. And I think that for the Patriots to finally find that guy to replace Tom Brady after going through the Mac Jones experience, that I just don't think you can pass up on it as much as I like the idea of trading back and getting more picks, because the Patriots aren't like some of these other teams at the top of the draft that have a ton of draft capital down the road. They don't. They kind of have their normal allotment of picks. So I can understand wanting to move back, but when there's an option like Maye, especially the fact that you have him number 1 holds a lot of weight in my mind too. I just don't see how you can pass up on the upside that what Maye would offer at number 3.
Yeah, and I think the big question on everyone's minds is if he landed in a place like New England that doesn't have the requisite support right now on day 1, could that break him? And the hard truth is, yes, it could break him, right? We don't know what's going to happen. The odds are not every QB prospect in this class is going to pan out. So, I do think there is a little bit of bust potential there, but I think we sleep on the floor that he has with his processing ability, with his leverage IQ, both in the pocket and downfield, anticipating windows over the middle of the field, the problem-solving ability off script too. There are plays where he'll step up into the B gap, right? He'll manage the pocket, play spacing, roll out when he needs to, playing disciplined and patient, and then throw across his body to a guy who's wide open on the left side, right? Having that full field vision and that instinct in the heat of the moment too is very impressive. So I look at Drake Maye and I see the high level talent. I see the processing ability, the anticipation ability, the DB manipulation capacity. And I think a lot of the things that he has issues with, again, the mechanical congruence, right? The composure in the heat of the moment. I think those things can be improved upon. I think those are things that are more easily fixable than not having the ability to see things quickly and anticipate. I think he absolutely has that for a young QB. He can change protections at the line too. He's got a lot of command for a young QB. So for me, yes, there is bust potential, but there is with every QB prospect. I don't think there's a disproportionate amount of bust potential with Drake Maye compared to anyone else. I think Drake Maye has a very high floor for young QB, and the ceiling is one that I'm very much eager to add to my room at 3 overall.
Same here. This is a no-brainer for us. So we'll go with Drake Maye here. So the Patriots could think about trading. I think the Cardinals will seriously consider thinking about trading on and moving out of 4 here, right, Ian? I mean, it seems like every mock draft has the Vikings trading up to this position, and it seems too obvious that the Vikings have 2 first-round picks now. They desperately need a quarterback option. GM Quesky-Mensah has all but admitted that he's trying to trade up and to move up for this franchise quarterback. Talk to me, Ian, about what your thought process would be here. It's the fact is that the Cardinals have a lot of picks already. They have a lot of extra draft capital this year. At some point, you have to find players. Marvin Harrison is sitting right there as a top of the line wide receiver 1 prospect. How would you approach this if you're GM Monty Ossenfort in Arizona? How would you value getting more picks and adding to that stockpile versus there's a guy like Marvin Harrison right here at our fingertips that we could drop into our offense today? How would you kind of balance that if you're running Arizona?
It's tough because Marvin Harrison Jr. is phenomenal. He's my top non-QB in this class, but you also have Rome Odunze and Malik Neighbors, who are top 10 prospects who would be wide receiver 1 in any other given class, right? So I think Monty Ossenfort, we saw from his first year, if there's one thing we saw, he's willing to work the phones, right? And it's tough to pass up a guy like Marvin Harrison Jr., but if you can get 11 and 23 and next year's first from Minnesota, right? So and then you can trade back up from 11 and get a guy like Rome Odunze if you want to, right? So I think if you can be fluid, yes, you're playing with fire a little bit because you're risking that those 2 guys are taken before you have a chance to get back up. But if you're willing to encumber picks, I think it's definitely a worthwhile proposition. The bottom line is Arizona has leverage because, we've talked so much about the trade up destinations. It's 4 or 5. It's the Cardinals at 4 or the Chargers at 5. By default, I think that makes it the Cardinals at 4, right? Because if you're an NFL team looking to get JJ McCarthy, right? The Vikings seem high on his upside, right? The Broncos and Raiders are in that conversation. The Giants from 6 could maybe make that slight trade up. If you're one of those teams, you need the prime real estate. Number 4 is the prime real estate right now because that's your first opportunity to get this guy. I find it very hard to believe that Arizona, would pass up on that leverage. You can get an absolute haul. It's all about supply and demand. There's only one top 4 quarterback left, and there's 4 teams fighting over him, right? So I think that prime real estate is going to be what's fought over. I think for Arizona, it's tough passing up on Marvin Harrison Jr., but I think there's enough upside with how high you can drive the price up. I would be willing to play with fire, and especially with this class, because you can probably be aggressive and move back up for Rome Odunze or Malik Neighbors. I think there is that potential. And for the purposes here, if we're exploring opportunities, if we're exploring outcomes, I say we go for it. I say we have Minnesota trade up 11-23 in next year's first for the 4th overall pick. So Minnesota gets JJ McCarthy, and Arizona rolls the dice a little bit and tries to get my optimum value.
Let's do it. So you can do all the trades you want in the mock draft simulator here. So we're controlling all the teams. So we'll propose a trade here between Arizona, and we will also pick the Vikings. So Arizona is going to give number 4 to the Vikings. Minnesota is going to give 11, 23, and a 2025 first.
And for
I would not. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, for any Vikings fans out there, not eager to add JJ McCarthy, because I know he's a polarizing prospect for sure. I do think in the right situation with the right support, I think the Vikings have the best supporting structure of any QB needy team in this class. I think they have the offensive line in place. You got Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, right? You have Kevin O'Connell, who's a very, very proven offensive mind who can incubate JJ McCarthy early on, help him play in structure, but also maximize his physical ability, the agility, the off-platform throwing on boot actions and rollouts. I think there's a lot of upside to get McCarthy to his peak here, right? He hasn't proven as much as some of the other guys, but in this situation, I think there's a ton of reason to be optimistic. So I think it's one of those where, it's very much worth the risk, and I think it could pay dividends.
I totally agree. And I did an article earlier this year ranking the best situations for these rookie quarterbacks. And I had Minnesota number one as well. You mentioned the play calling, solid, I think underrated offensive line too, that could protect McCarthy. And I'm not a huge fan of Sam Darnold, but if somehow the Vikings don't end up with a quarterback, I actually think Sam Darnold could have success in that environment. I really do. So I think to drop a guy like McCarthy in there would make sense. I was going to say I would not be surprised if it even takes a little more than what we're offering here for this pick. Like if the Vikings have to throw in a little more filler at some point, like just because of what you mentioned, that the price is going to get driven up so high at this pick that I wouldn't be surprised. But I think this is a solid package. We look back at what the 49ers paid to move up for Trey Lance, 3 first-round picks. So this is right in that ballpark. So we'll go ahead and propose that trade. And
you might need to propose it as the Vikings, because the Vikings are the one making the call up. Yeah.
There we go.
And it's just simple supply and demand, man. It's economics, man. Sometimes it's tough to commit fully to these QB prospects who have holes in their profile. JJ McCarthy being one of them. You would have liked him to elevate his team a little more down the stretch. And it's not that Michigan didn't win in spite of him, but there weren't a ton of games where you can, definitively say, yes, this is a top 5 pick putting the team on his back, right? As opposed to Caleb Williams, who is trying to, claw back from the bottom of the hole when his defense is letting 40 points by, right? It's different. It's different with McCarthy because it's not proven on the surface, but the upside is there. I think the arm talent is very good. I think the arm elasticity off platform, right? The drive velocity on middle field throws and the aggressiveness to test defenders when they turn their eyes away, right? When they give up that eye discipline, capitalizing on that and recognizing those opportunities. I think those things are very promising with McCarthy. So you want him to be more consistent on a down-to-down basis. But if there's any place where he can get to that point, it's Minnesota.
Let's send him there with pick number 4. McCarthy is there. All right, so we've got the Chargers at 5 here with a ton of good prospects on the board. I mean, Marvin Harrison is still here. Jim Harbaugh has been open about his proclivity for offensive linemen. I mean, I feel like he's just telling us how badly he wants to take an offensive tackle here and replace Trey Pipkins at right tackle. But Malik Neighbors is still here. Ramadunze is still here. There's a lot of options. I mean, the Chargers could trade back too. I think that's a possibility for a team that's probably going to enter a reset year this year. They cut Mike Williams. They traded Keon Allen. There's a lot of talent that's left Los Angeles this past offseason. So I think if they're looking at a reset year, a trade back could make sense. But I don't know. What do you feel here? Is it going to be too hard for them to pass on Harrison Jr., or is there another direction you think they could go in?
It's difficult because you didn't get great returns from Quentin Johnston in his rookie year. And I'll be the first to say I had a pretty high grade on Johnston. That was a reevaluation case for me, where I looked back and I might have overinflated the route running upside because you see the lateral twitch and the foot speed and the suddenness for his size. And you're like, wow, there's a lot there. But looking back, the high pad level, the inconsistent hip sync is really an issue too. And then at the catch point, right? For a guy who has those limitations, can he catch consistently? The hand technique, that's a red flag too. So looking back, that was a learning experience for me. And I think for Los Angeles, you do have an opportunity to right those wrongs with Marvin Harrison Jr., a guy who's 6'3", 206, who can separate with the best of them, who can catch the football. So it's one of those things where you have an opportunity for sure. And I know Jim Harbaugh had a firsthand experience playing against MHJ in the Big Ten, and he saw, especially in the final game of the season, just how much of a problem he could cause against Will Johnson, corner, who could be a first-round pick in 2025. So, he has a very, very a lot of familiarity with MHJ for sure. But I look at Los Angeles. You have a big void at right tackle. We know Harbaugh has been adamant about improving the offensive line. So you could trade back here. I think if the Chargers are willing to, again, kind of roll the dice like the Cardinals just did, right? It's a strong receiver class. Are they willing to do it? You could trade back for a team that's head over heels for Harrison and then get an offensive lineman later in round 1. For this live mock, I don't know if we'll do that because it's going to take a lot of experimentation. And I do look at what Marvin Harrison Jr. can provide, right? He immediately gives you a bona fide wide receiver 1 for Justin Herbert. I think his ability to, run routes and separate is top notch. Again, the flexibility, the route nuance, and he's like a pass rusher at route stems, man. He's got double swipes, rip moves. He's got the full arsenal. And then he's got the vertical speed to go down the field and test defenses that way too. He's got the explosiveness and the long strider athleticism to be a rack threat. There's really nothing that he doesn't provide you, right? So, and he's a good blocker as well. So I think every box that you need to check, Marvin Harrison Jr. does check that. So I say we go with Harrison Jr. here, keep it simple, get that wide receiver 1, and that allows Quentin Johnston to be utilized as a rack threat underneath too, which I think could be more conducive to his success. Maybe you transition him in a similar way that Kansas City did with Rashee Rice. Let him use his long strider explosiveness on the lateral plane as a drag threat, mesh threat. I think this opens up the possibilities for him too. And then maybe round 2, look at a guy like Roger Rosengarten from Washington as a right tackle. I really like the upside with him. So I do think there are options. Again, you're playing with fire. You're trying to find the best balance. But come on, man. Justin Herbert, Marvin Harrison Jr., it's just fun to think about that.
It's too much fun to pass up. And I feel like as much as Harbaugh has talked about offensive line, like the Chargers offensive line need is a little overstated. I feel like Trey Pipkins is a starting right tackle at the NFL level. They just gave him a decently big contract. Like they don't have to get a right tackle. They pretty much they have to get a receiver at some point in this draft. Like you just can't go out with Josh Palmer, and I don't even know if Alex Erickson is still on this Chargers roster, but that's the level of receivers they were playing last year. Like I just don't feel like you can go back with that entering next year. So let's go with Marvin Harrison here.
Yeah, for sure. And I see Walt in the comments saying TJ Tampa, round 2, Ruke Aroraro. You've got Matt Gonsalves at tackle. That would be a good draft. I think TJ Tampa, especially for that defense that they're working with, he can play zone. He can impose and press man with his length and his explosiveness too. He's physical and run support. Gonsalves is one of my sleepers on early day 3. He could sneak into top 100. I do think that's possible, but early day 3, he's got left-right versatility at tackle. You could slide him inside the guard as well. Physical mauler with enough athleticism to work with. And then Aroraro, it took me forever to pronounce that correctly. Ruke.
Oh, me too.
It's tough, but he's a fun player too. You know, he's got really good athletic tools. I was really intrigued by the athletic comparison, relative athletic score. Very similar to Gerald McCoy from Tampa Bay. So Aroraro he's not nearly the pass rusher yet, but he's a very good run defender with that elite initial explosiveness, that power profile. I think there's a lot of upside to unearth with that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that makes a lot of sense as far as a draft class for the Chargers. Let's go here to number 6 with the Giants. With a lot of rumors that the Giants want to move up for a quarterback, and it'd be a pretty short jump. I mean, a shorter jump than the Vikings are going to have to do, obviously, and shorter than some of these other teams like the Broncos and Raiders that we'll talk about later. In our draft, they're not doing that. They missed out on all 4 quarterbacks. So where do you see them going? I think most people have a wide receiver here pegged to the Giants here. Sometimes that's Malik Neighbors. Sometimes that's Rome Odunze. I've seen both. I've put both in my own mocks. Do you favor one of those over the other? Do you think there's another position the Giants could go here? How would you handle this number 6 pick for the Giants?
Yeah, it's tough because again, you kind of need that quarterback. The writing's on the wall with Daniel Jones. You know, it doesn't seem like they're gonna commit to him long term now, and I wouldn't. You know, I think you need to start looking at the future there. But you know, with the Vikings trading up to get JJ McCarthy, like they have the first round capital to kind of entice the team. They have 2 first rounders this year, and they have 1 next year. You know, I think that could be enough to sway teams, and you know, put a little sweetener in there on the addition, right? But the Giants, for me, I think whoever you have a QB this year or next year, getting a guy like a Dunze or Neighbors will help them immensely, right? Right now, you don't have a wide receiver in that room with the gravity of either of those guys. So then it comes down to what is the preferred mold that you're looking for. And for the Giants specifically, I really like Neighbors. But you know, I'm looking for a guy with that more complete 3-level profile. And to me, that's a Dunze, you know, 6'3", over 210. You know, he's got the route running ability, the fluidity, the manipulative tendencies where he can sink and redirect just like that. He's got pretty good rack ability, not the strongest guy. I think Malik Neighbors is a much better rack threat. I think that's where he has the separation. But Rome Odunze is the better route runner, in my opinion. I think he's more fluid in and out of breaks right now. I think Neighbors, there are times where his plant and drive technique can be a little more efficient. And then at the catch point, Odunze is one of the most instinctive receivers that I've seen. His body control, his ability to use late hands to control positioning at the catch point, right? The contortion ability, the flexibility, truly top notch. So I think Rome Odunze gives me more gravity as that complete 3-level threat on the boundary. But I think Malik Neighbors has upside too. Like I said, I don't think there's a wrong answer for you here, but just for the preferences of what the New York Giants need, I think Rome Odunze allows other ancillary threats to play off him where he can be that true wide receiver 1 and allow you more flexibility across the offense. So I would go with Rome Odunze here. But again, I can see arguments for both players.
Yeah, I mean, the Giants have been running this all slot receiver offense for God knows how long. It feels like they need that true outside threat, and Odunze should be that guy. Is it just me, or feels like his floor is just so high. Like it just feels like the idea of him totally busting or totally failing, like it seems like so minuscule to me. Like he will be at absolute worst, like a starting caliber wide receiver at absolute worst. It feels like to me.
Yeah, I think the floor is very, very high for him. And you could see that even back in 2022. Like if he had declared last year, he would have been a wide receiver one candidate. And then he took things to another level in 2023. And I think NFL evaluators are really going to like the work ethic too and the competitive mentality. We saw it at the NFL Combine, just a little snippet of it, but he was out there late. All the drills had finished and he was still trying to run his 3-cone to get below, I think, 6.6. He never got to that point, but it shows you the competitive mentality, the drive to always get better, right? And we saw that in action in 2023, where he had a phenomenal 2022 and he somehow got even better. And you could see the improved nuance in his route running, the deceptive play style, the improved route tree where he was, even more variable, right? And then the control at the catch point where he's literally perfected the art of controlling positioning with timing and hands, right? So I think with Rome Odunze, you have the elite athleticism and then you have the elite mentality too. So I know some people have him as wide receiver 2, maybe even wide receiver 1 in a few select corners. Again, this class, in my opinion, has 3 true wide receiver 1s, and that's going to make it so compelling to get one of them in the top 10.
Let's end Odunze here at 6. Number 7 feels like, it just feels like the most obvious pick, maybe in this entire draft. The Titans need a left tackle. They that's like the one spot they didn't go out and acquire in their big spending spree this year. They added Calvin Ridley. They added L'Jarius Sneed. They traded for from the Chiefs. They had Chidobe Awuzie. They've gone all out acquiring these veterans. They've left like this gaping, blinking sign at left tackle, like, hey, we're about to draft a first-round left tackle here. Is that Joe Alt for you? Is that Olufoshano? Is that a surprise? It feels like Alt's the guy, but I would not be totally surprised if this is a different offensive tackle here at number 7. What say you?
Yeah, for sure. And I think they have a need kind of a left and right tackle. Nicholas Petit-Frere hasn't solidified himself as a long-term option as well. So I think there's a lot of uncertainty. So if you can at least chip away at that, I think that's something to work on. I think Joe Alt would be the choice for me here, though. He's my OT1. He's a top 5 player for me, actually. Before the season, it was Alt and Olufoshano who were fighting for that mantle. But I think Alt really separated himself in 2023. My notes on him coming to the year, right? Very athletic, very flexible. The dude is 6'9", and he plays with some of the best pad level that I've seen in this class. It's uncanny, right? Usually you see a guy who's 6'8", 6'9". There's a point of diminishing returns where sometimes it's a little harder to sink your hips and acquire proper pad level and play with leverage. But Joe Alt is one of the most flexible blockers that I've seen. And that flexibility not only allows him to acquire leverage and maintain it through reps, but the corrective recovery freedom that he has is also just truly unmatched. So, and then combine that with his ability as a technician and a hand fighter that he improved on in 2023, the improved play strength, right? And then his ability to use his length and explosiveness to drive in the run game. To me, it's not really that close. He's my OT1, and I think for the Titans, he'd be an instant impact player, blue chip, all pro potential. It's a really one of the easier valuations, which was tricky because coming into the year, again, it was Olu or Joe Alt, or maybe even JC Latham, Taliese Fuaga, Troy Fatanu, right? But I think it's a very strong offensive line class, but to me, Alt really separated himself, and I think he's got true impact potential. So protecting Will Levis, let's go with Alt. This is the easy pick for me here.
I cannot wait to see Bill Callahan, who I think is maybe a Hall of Fame offensive line coach down the road. Like I can't wait to see him get his hands on Joe Alt and see how that goes during his rookie year. Number 8, I feel like is another kind of obvious spot where everybody's penciling in Dallas Turner here. It makes sense, right? The Falcons need an edge defender. It makes sense. They don't need an offensive lineman. They could take a wide receiver, I guess. They could trade back. They could take another defensive player. They could take a corner. There are other spots they could go, but by and large, in the mocks that I've seen, the mocks that I've written, Dallas Turner has kind of been the pick here. Does it make sense to you, Ian, to go in a different direction, or is that kind of where you're at too?
You could pick Malik Neighbors. I think, if you're trying to go all in on the short window that you have with Kirk Cousins, you could pick Malik Neighbors, because I know they signed Darnell Mooney in free agency, which he's a solid complementary threat, but nothing really more than that, right? Drake London is a very good wide receiver 1, not an elite one yet, but I think he's getting up, he's growing, right? And then I think Kyle Pitts will be utilized more in this offensive structure, but Malik Neighbors could be a really exciting completing piece for this offense. When you think about, again, his rack ability in the short range, his ability to test defenses vertically on slot fades and 9 routes and seam throws, that dynamic vertical, horizontal utility is very appealing with him. But this defense has needed a premier edge threat for a while now. It was sorely lacking last year. And I liked Arnold Ebiketie coming out. I thought he was a good prospect, but I think you need more than that. I think you need a guy who can be a true blue chip talent on the defensive line and on the front. And I think Dallas Turner has the tools to be that. 6'3", 247, 34.5-inch arms, ran a 4.46 at the NFL Combine, just put up insane numbers. And the thing is, too, it's not just an athletic, a workout warrior type of evaluation. You watch him on tape, he is winning with bend, finesse, power, right? Sometimes with his speed and bend, it can be so devastating for tackles who set too thin inside and let him get around the arc. But then just when you think he's a finesse guy, he can just explode inside your frame with that burst and that length and plow tackles off their feet. It's very fun to watch. I think with him, you're still refining that hand usage a little bit, but I think all the tools are there to, again, be an alignment, versatile, disruptive force, which is exactly what this Falcons team needs to maximize that defensive line. You got Grady Jarrett, David Onyemata, right? You've got a lot of the pieces in place. Get that premier edge talent and just roll with it, right? So Malik Neighbors is really compelling here too, but for me personally, I look at the wide receiver class, I think there's more depth there. Whereas with the edge class, you've got Dallas Turner, you've got Laiatu Latu, Jared Verse, Chop Robinson, and then it falls off a little bit after the first round. So I think because that depth is a little more suspect on the edge side, I'm getting the premier defender here. I'm going to go with Dallas Turner.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, right? I mean, they definitely have a need there at edge, and they've really been looking for that edge defender for about a decade, I think, since John Abraham left, right? They've got that. They had that one Vic Beasley season.
Yeah, they thought they had it with nowhere,
Beasley,
but and then
yeah. But beyond that, they're really looking for that guy. And I think I saw some numbers that that Raheem Morris, when he was the Rams defensive coordinator, liked to drop his pass rushers into coverage quite a bit. And that's something Dallas Turner can do, right? I think that's probably something he could do if he gets sent there to Atlanta.
Oh yeah, for sure. He's easily very athletic. He's fluid too. He's athletic, he's explosive, and he's long. So with his length, he can include passing windows on the flats, but he's fluid as well. He can hinge around, he can maintain hip leverage. I don't think he's like a guy that I would man up a tight end with, but if you want to cover a running back seeping out into the flats, he can absolutely do that for sure.
Yeah. Okay, let's send him there. So at 9, we've got the Bears. We've got an offensive tackle here if they want it, but I don't know. I mean, they've got the need. They've got the room for a Malik Neighbors in this offense. It seems pretty tantalizing to me to go ahead and pick him here.
It's tough. I think they could, but also you could be compelled to. Could you be compelled to? If you're the Bears here, I'm putting you on the spot here. If you're the Bears, could you be compelled by a team like Arizona to trade down, get more picks? Because I think the Bears only have 4 picks in the draft, so this could be an opportunity to trade down, and that way you can maybe add a center on day 2, right?
Yeah.
Would you explore that if you're the Bears?
I would because of like what you mentioned. They do have so few picks. I think you want to, moving forward, if you're building around Caleb Williams, you want to make sure you have draft capital all down the road, right? You want to keep replenishing those picks. We've seen the Cardinals do that too throughout these past couple of years, but I don't know. It feels like such a perfect fit. You've got Keenan Allen, you've got DJ Moore. Keenan Allen's only on a 1-year contract, right? Yeah. Unless they extend him here before the season starts. He's 32 years old. It's not like he's got a lot of time left. I think it'd be hard to pick up on Neighbors if he's just sitting there for you. I've done mocks where the Bears are the ones kind of moving up a few picks to even ensure they get Neighbors.
Yeah.
I feel like if he falls right here to them, they don't have to do anything. It'd be hard for me to kind of pass up on him.
And they position themselves enough where they don't have a ton of needs to begin with, right? So you don't need to get a ton of capital in this class. But at the same time, too, if you add a few more picks, you can improve the depth of the roster, right? Which they can do that down the road, too. Like, they don't have to do it right now, but this pick and the leverage you have does give you the opportunity to do that. I'm going to let you make this decision because I'm kind of on the fence. I could trade down, and I could see the Cardinals because the Cardinals have so much day 2 capital. If they wanted to, they haven't picked a receiver yet. So they could trade up and get Malik Neighbors because you need that premier threat in your offense. But it would take a lot to compel me off that pick if I'm the Bears for sure. So I'll let you make the decision. It's tough. It's a 50-50 call.
It's really tough. And I wouldn't rule out edge rusher too, because they do need another edge to play alongside Montez Sweat. Like that is a hole they need. But even if you like Latu a lot or Jared Verse on one of these guys, like I just don't think you can take him over Neighbors. And I do understand the argument for trading back here, like I said, but for me, I'm going with Malik Neighbors. I'm not gonna hope that I can get a receiver down the line who could be at his level, because I don't think there is another one going to be available, and I'm not going to pass up on the opportunity to add a game changing threat. If Keenan Allen were 2-3 years younger and had another 2-3 years on his contract, I might think differently. But I think you're going to need a wide receiver 2 as early as next season. So I think you can't pass up on Neighbors. So I'm going to go with him here at number 9.
And I will say, for a year, even if it's just a year, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, and Malik Neighbors in the same receiving core with Caleb Williams, like, come on, that's just unfair. I do think for the Bears, it's a unique proposition because I think for the Cardinals, having the day 2 capital they have, right? We talked about the edge class. It falls off a bit after round 1. So if you have to wait until 75, guys like Adisa Isaac, Marshawn Nealand, they might not be there. So that's kind of the risk you're running. But at the same time, getting a guy like Neighbors, right? And you can sign a veteran edge too if you want to. I think there's that opportunity too.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of ways.
And you're not going to go out and sign a veteran receiver at this point. Like there are not the options that there might be at edge. So at least for this specific year too, I think it might make more sense to go with Neighbors. Jets would be pretty upset in this scenario, I think, because they would probably be interested in adding Malik Neighbors to their roster if they had the opportunity. What are you thinking here? I mean, this is a make or break year for the Jets. I mean, I think if things don't go well this year, Joe Douglas, the general manager, Robert Saleh, both gone. Aaron Rodgers, no, who knows what his future is. Trying to optimize for this season, I would think. So where does that lean you if you're the Jets, Ian? Are you thinking Brock Bowers? Are you thinking an offensive tackle? What are you thinking here for the Jets?
Yeah, for sure. And real quick, while we're kind of on an intermission, I want to address some of the comments from Walt. Jermaine Burton is the guy who's got Atlanta picking. Jermaine Burton, if it's just on the field talent, man, he'd be a top 50 player for me. It's the character evaluation that's kind of tricky with him. There have been rumors that he was kind of in the doghouse for a couple coaches in the league, and he bounced around a lot. So, I don't have the inside perspective on his character, but I can say it's enough of a red flag that he could fall down the board. But the talent is phenomenal. He's a phenomenal route runner. He's a speed guy. He's got really sure hands as well. So if you can get him to, stay measured off the field and kind of mature a little bit, the rewards could be very plentiful for you. You got Brian Thomas at 23 and Roman Wilson at 66. Roman Wilson's a fun player, man. I like him a lot. I think just athletically and the route running ability kind of reminds me of Chris Olave because he's a speed guy. He's fast, but he's streamlined and he can use that curvilinear acceleration and bend to really manipulate DBs on breaks and just sear into open space. So I love the athletic upside, and then he's very willing to block and get his nose dirty as well. So fun player. I have him as a top 60 guy. I want to say top 55. He's pretty highly rated for me, and I like his upside a lot. But for the Jets at number 10, I think that would be too high for Roman Wilson. No, I'm kidding. Roman Wilson, phenomenal second rounder, but we're in the first round, and we do have a few options here. I think Brian Thomas Jr., a little too high for me with him, but I can understand trading back and getting him right. Brock Bowers could be an option. They got Tyler Conklin, but Brock Bowers just provides a different level of versatility as a weapon, right? I think you can use him as a big slot. You can use him off sweeps and jet motions, right? You can use him as a vertical threat up the seam. There's so much upside with that. And with Mike Williams and Garrett Wilson, there's a lot of upside there for sure. But I look at the Jets tackle situation too. Tyron Smith is on a 1-year deal. Morgan Moses, I think, has a shorter term contract as well. And they're both well over 30 years old. Morgan Moses has been an Iron Man for the better part of his NFL career, but Tyron Smith has a lot of injury issues that might not go away, right? So I'm looking at Troy Fatanu from Washington as a guy that I find very compelling here for the Jets for a couple of reasons. One, again, 6'4", 320, 34 and a half inch arms. So he's got that build, but very athletic, very good pass protector, right? And then a mauler in the run game too. He's got immediate tackle guard versatility. So if you need him to play guard in a pinch, if John Simpson or Elijah Vera Tucker gets injured, you can do that. He can play either of those spots. And then when Smith moves on in 2025, you have an impact. You have a plug and play starting tackle who has impact upside too. So, I think it's more of a future-minded move than some would prefer at 10th overall. Ideally, you want a guy who can make a tangible impact on day one. But I think it's going to pay dividends down the line because you get security at one of the most important position groups. That's where I would lean. What is your feeling, Ben, for the Jets at 10? Because it's a tricky spot to pick.
Yeah, it's tough because you do want to optimize for this season, and maybe taking an offensive tackle doesn't feel like it's optimizing for this season because he's probably not going to start right away. Yeah. I would say taking an offensive tackle is optimizing for this season because Tyron Smith is guaranteed to miss games. Yeah. He has not completed a full season in like a decade. There's just no chance he gets through this season without missing games. Morgan Moses, you're right, is an absolute Iron Man who had not missed, I don't think a single game in his career until last year when he got injured and missed a few games, and he's over the age of 30. He's on a 1-year contract too. Elijah Vera Tucker has suffered a serious injury in each of the last 2 seasons, Achilles, and I think a pectoral that kicked him out for the rest of the year. very talented player, but I don't think you can count on him either. So I think getting a guy like Fatanu who could play multiple positions, I think makes a lot of sense, because I think he's going to play in year one, whether that's at right tackle, left tackle, right guard, wherever it is. I think he's going to play. I did want to ask about Bowers, and I do see him in a lot of mocks going here to number 10. I think if you're not going to get a receiver, I think he's like the next obvious pass catcher here that you could add to this offense. I would wonder, if things don't go right for the Jets this year and they have a new coaching staff next year, a tight end might not fit every offense, right? You don't know who the Jets are going to be, who's going to be coaching the Jets next year. Maybe Brock Bowers wouldn't even be a fit for them. You take an offensive tackle like Troy Fontenot, he's going to be a fit for whoever that next coaching staff is, regardless of what scheme they run. He's going to be a contributor. So I think, I don't know that Joe Douglas, the general manager, is like using that logic. Maybe someone above him would have to think of that logic and say, what's the best move, a contingency in case we have different staff next year. But that's why I would not go with Bowers if I were the Jets, and I could easily see going with a tackle.
Yeah, and Brock Bowers too. I think with him you can use the big slot utility, but Joe Douglas is a former offensive lineman. He's a big OL masterminds guy, so he's got that OL background. I think anytime there's uncertainty on the offensive line, he's going to spend early capital to correct that and remedy that. And I think Troy Fatanu, out of the guys that are available, you do have Olu Fashanu, who's my OT2, but I think when I think about what the Jets need, it's not just a talented player, it's security, it's positional versatility, right? Troy Fatanu gives that more than most of these guys. So I would go with Troy Fatanu here. It's tough though, because it's tough to pass up on a guy like Bowers, who you can weaponize right out of the gate. We know Aaron Rodgers traditionally in his career has really enjoyed having a tight end to use up the seam in the red zone, right? And Brock Bowers gives that and more. So it's really tough to pass up on. But I'm leaning Troy Fatanu. Again, you're the button man, so I'll let you go with the real pick. But I'm leaning Fatanu. I'm leaning Fatanu.
No, I like it. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to give Aaron Rodgers his souped up version of Jermichael Finley, right? But I think Troy Fontenot is the guy. I think that makes a lot of sense, so we'll go with him. So now we've got the Cardinals here, who have traded back. They'll have 3 first-round picks now in this first round. Again, a lot of options that I think the Cardinals are a team that you could almost pick anything and feel like it's an upgrade. I mean, they spent some money to upgrade on their interior defensive line, but it was a bunch of league average guys at best. There's pretty much anywhere you could go. I could see them getting an offensive tackle, even though they did sign Jonah Williams in free agency and they drafted Paris Johnson last year. I still think that both of those guys, I'm not sure about Fashanu, how you feel about Fashanu, but Williams and Paris Johnson both have guard flexibility. Absolutely. If the Cardinals just want to get their best 5 linemen out there. So I could see offensive line. I could see corner. I could see edge. I could see a lot of things for the Cardinals. That's just kind of the state of their roster. What do you see, Ian?
Yeah, it's difficult. And you have those 2, we have 3 first rounders for the Cardinals now, because we traded back. We got 11, 23 in addition to 27. So we have a lot of capital in this round. So this could be a point where you maybe take a guy a little bit higher than he's expected to go if you don't think you're going to be able to get him later at a position of need. I think with the Cardinals, there are a few options here, right? I think tackle we can hold off on because Jonah Williams was signed to a 2-year deal, I believe. So, a little bit longer commitment, and he can play left or right. So they feel secure there. A couple positions that I'm looking at: corner, Quinyon Mitchell or Terrion Arnold, or Brian Thomas Jr. at wide receiver. I think Brian Thomas Jr., there is a little bit of uncertainty with him, but I look at the physical profile and the route running upside. I think some of the components, the building blocks that I look for: curvilinear acceleration, bend, hip flexibility, right? And the ability to offset defenders at stems with lateral adjustments. I think he can do that. And then he has the elite speed to compensate as well. My comp for him is Javon Walker, who was picked, I think, in round 1 by the Packers back in, I think it was 2000 or 2001. He had an injury that ended his career a little bit prematurely. But, before that, he rose to an all-pro level where he was that elite vertical threat with that size, speed, athleticism. But then he can attack the ball at the catch point, too. I see that ability with Brian Thomas as well, where he can attack the ball, go beyond his frame, and make those tough catches, walling off DBs. So for Arizona, it's one of those picks where it's a little bit higher. He's my 17th overall player. So it's not a huge reach, right? But it is a little higher than, say, a Terrion Arnold, who's actually my CB1, Quinyon Mitchell, who's I think 16th overall on my board. But I just look at what they need. They have almost nothing at wide receiver, man. It's Michael Wilson, Greg Dortch. You need a guy. And I if you wait until 23, right? Or if you pass pass him up right here. Maybe the Broncos take him, right? Maybe the Colts take him at 15. It's a little too much of a risk for me to run.
Sure.
I look at that and I see a wide receiver 1 profile who's trending up drastically after his 2023 season. And you can use him as a big slot. You can use him as a boundary threat. You can scheme rack touches for him. He's a pretty crafty rack threat too. So I'm getting Brian Thomas Jr. I'm banking on the upside here, and I'm comfortable knowing that I have 23 and 27 that I can use on other positions.
Yeah, I think if you're gonna want a receiver here in the first round, it's gonna fall off a cliff here pretty soon. Like this is the guy if you want to do it. And it might seem early. I mean, 11 is probably early than we've seen Brian Thomas go, and maybe optically it's not great to be taking Brian Thomas 2 picks after Malik Neighbors goes when you could have had him or Marvin Harrison. I can understand that if you're a Cardinals fan thinking, oh my God, we could have had either of these top 3 guys, and here we are taking Brian Thomas just a few picks later. But I think what you're talking about from a roster building perspective, you can't just look at it that way. You have to think we've got Brian Thomas plus 2 additional first round picks in the future, and we can use our other picks to bolster the rest of this roster. So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, because there's a good chance. There's a good chance that one of Byron Murphy II or Johnny Newton is there for DT. There's a good chance that maybe Cooper DeJean is there if you want a hybrid defensive back, right? And maybe a corner falls too, right? I think it's one of those picks where if you don't get Brian Thomas Jr. here, you might be reserved to A.D. Mitchell or Xavier Worthy, right? Both very good receiver prospects, but a little more uncertainty there. The profile with A.D. Mitchell, the consistency down to down off the field as well. There's been talk about the diabetics and how he's gonna manage that at the NFL level. And then Xavier Worthy, the outlier size as well, probably confined to more of a speed guy, and I think he's a very good route runner too. But Brian Thomas Jr. to me has a more secure physical profile and a more secure production profile, and the versatility to be implemented in a number of ways as well.
I like that fit a lot. Let's go to number 12 with the Broncos. Going into a reset here after cutting Russell Wilson. I mean, they're taking on $53 million in dead money in Russell Wilson this year for him to not be on the roster. I mean, it is a reset if we've ever seen one. Does that mean they'll reach for a quarterback here at 12? Does that mean they'll trade back and try and get extra picks, or will they just take best player available? It's another team where I don't think you could just take any player you want, but Bowers, Arnold, a pass rusher. There are a lot of guys who could fit the Broncos here.
And it's a tricky question because, hang on, do we think they would trade down here? Because I'm looking at, who are some teams that have proven that they are willing to trade up, if they get the Steelers at 20, and I see Olu Fashanu here. Would they maybe do that to pair him with Roger Jones? What are you thinking about the potential energy for a trade here?
I do think I think the Broncos would be interested in it for sure to get extra picks. And I think it makes sense just given where they are in their competitive window. I don't know if there was still a quarterback here, sure, or one of the top receivers, sure. Yeah. I would wonder if a team is trading up to get an offensive tackle, given how deep this class is. I'm wondering if a team is trading up to get a guy with health concerns like Latu. I would wonder if teams would have that interest in giving up picks, given that we're kind of in that area of the draft where maybe the value isn't all that different. So that would be my only thing. If it's somebody loves Brock Bowers and they want to come up to get him here, I could see that. I don't know about coming out for an offensive tackle, just given how many other options there will be a little further down the board.
So are there any teams that would trade up for Bowers? I know the Colts have been in that discussion at 15. It's not a big jump down for the Broncos, so you're not getting a ton of capital probably. But man, the Broncos are such a tough team to mock for because you need a quarterback, but the roster is also pretty shoddy across the board, right? Receiver could use an upgrade. The offensive line has long-term questions. The interior defensive line in the edge room is really weak. And then you've got corner. You could use the corner opposite Patrick Surtain too. So there's a lot of room for improvement, right? And I think that you need more capital, but I'd have the phone line open. In this scenario, Brock Bowers is probably the biggest trade chip they got, and the Colts are probably the best suitor for you. You think the Colts would be willing to wheel and deal here?
I do. I think let's just see what it would take, I think, if they wanted to do it. Because, Chris Ballard loves these type of guys. He loves athletic guys. I think that the Colts have a lot of tight ends, but I wouldn't say they have a good tight end at this point. Mm-hmm. So I could see them getting a guy like Bowers. So what do you think it would take to move from 12 to 15? I don't have the trade calculator in front of me, but Just add 46. Do you think that's too much? Do you think that's too much to move up just 3 spots?
Let's try it. Let's try it. Because again, you're getting a vertical weapon, right? You're getting a guy that kind of allows you the flexibility to not take a receiver at 46,
Yeah.
which is something that the Colts have been mocked to. I think Brock Bowers can fit as that vertical weapon alongside Michael Pittman Jr. and Josh Downs, and you got Alec Pierce in the rotation as well. I think it gives them the flexibility where they can use that pick. So he's such a fun weapon. I think let's try it. Did it work?
It did. It went through.
Did.
So
Okay,
we
cool.
gave up. Yeah, we gave up 15 and 46 for 12, and we're going to take Brock Bowers. I love to get him in the hands of Shane Steichen. I think that will be very fun. I think there are few coaches I would trust more to get the most out of a guy like this than Shane Steichen. After watching him with the Eagles and then watching him in his first season last year as the Colts head coach. So I love this. I think we'll put him there. Another interesting pick here. Go ahead.
Yeah, we got a couple questions. I know Walt is talking about the Denver and the Raiders at 12 and 13. If they don't get a top 6 QB, they have failed, and it's tough, man. It really is, because I think Michael Penix Jr., Bo Nix, how we value these guys, it's a tricky call, because again, Michael Penix Jr., the medical check at the combine was the biggest thing for me. I think that was the biggest roadblock precluding him from getting round 1 capital. And he passed that, right? I think his competitive mentality, I think his leadership ability, right? That's going to win over NFL coaches for sure. It's just a matter of projecting his physical skill set, because he's got the arm talent. He's got the drive velocity for sure. He's got straight line speed. We've seen it. The mechanics can be a little arm dominant for me. The lower body mechanics can be more consistent. I think the accuracy can improve a little bit too. There are times where, if he's not testing defenses outside the numbers, between the hashes, right down the field, those short range throws can be a little volatile there, right? And then the tall frame, the hip stiffness, that can show up in the creation phase too. So both him and Bo Nix have questions that would make me a little uncertain drafting them at 12 and 13. Maybe with the trade back, yes. But and that's tough, because if you need a QB, you don't want to trade down to get a QB, right? Because then you risk not getting them. So it's a tough balance that they've placed themselves in, being at 12 and 13. I think the ideal situation is trading down and getting that guy. But again, you run the risk of not getting him. And then we got Rob asking, could the Rams move up for Latu? I think they could, for sure. I think with Latu, you have some medical concerns with him, and I don't think it showed up as a big concern at the combine, but teams who host him on visits will do independent medical checks too. So he could fail for some of those teams too. Every team is different. And then I remember John Howland, I think it was one of the classes when Jonathan Allen came out, right? He was viewed as a potential top 10 pick, and then he fell to Washington in the mid-first round because of an arthritic issue that came up late. So it's tough to value medicals and kind of factor that in. I think if they really liked him, they could trade up, but I think they like Chop Robinson too. And I think there's a good chance that one of those guys would be there at 19. So I think they'd be comfortable waiting.
The medical stuff is so hard, is not being in the building and not seeing that side of it. I think that's probably the hardest part, right? As like an outside evaluator, is not having that information, because that can so heavily affect where these guys go. And it's just not stuff for the most part that we have access to on the outside.
Yeah. Yep, for sure. It's tough. It really is. And at that point, you just need to acknowledge what you can't know, right? There's some things that we can't know, get an inside perspective on, and that's just tough. But we have the Raiders here at 13. They could pick a quarterback, right? They could go with Penix if they really liked him. What are you feeling here? Because they could go quarterback. They could go corner. The top corners are still on the board. I think for Patrick Graham's scheme, Quinyon Mitchell being able to play off man and zone, that stands out as a fit to me. But are you thinking, what are your thoughts on Penix here and whether he fits the valuation?
It's tough. I think Penix could be a fit in that offense, especially with his deep ball ability. It kind of mesh with what Luke Getsy wants to do there. And you've seen reports that the Raiders like Penix a lot. And would I be surprised if he goes here? I absolutely would not. I've put him here in several of my mocks. It's probably not what I would do, but I could see it happening. I don't know. I think the Raiders have a big need in offensive line. And I think if you've got a guy like Olufushano staring you down here, I think it's tough for me to pass up on that. I think that I would probably draft him, put him in at right tackle, and call it a day. I'm not saying Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell are going to be the Raiders' long-term answers by any means, but I think you're better off getting a guy with Fashanu's pedigree here. And then, like you said, either trading back up into round 1 or just hoping that you can get a Bo Nix or a Michael Penix in round 2.
Yeah, for sure. And it's difficult, because if you don't get a QB here, you're not guaranteed to get one, but you also don't want to be cornered into getting a guy that you're not 100% sold on, right? And that's kind of the risk you run. And we've seen teams get burned by that before very often. So I think with the Raiders, definitely want to beef up the offensive line as well. Corner is compelling to me, but if you're confident about Olu Fashanu transitioning to right tackle, that's the thing. I think he started at right tackle back as a redshirt freshman in the bowl game against Arkansas, if I remember correctly, and he played well there. So he played left tackle for the next 2 seasons, but he's got the upside for sure. 6'6", over 320. For me, what really stands out from him is the recovery athleticism, the synergetic pass protection, and then the anchor strength as well. You're working with a lot. I think there are times where against power, he keeps his frame a little too wide sometimes and can expose himself to bull rushes and long arms. But by and large, I think you're working with a guy who can be a very good starter. I comp him to Jamal Brown, who was an all-pro for the Saints before an injury kind of ended his career prematurely. But a lot of tools, a lot of operational utility. I'm cool making the pick if you are. I know corner is a need too, but in round 2, round 3, you might be able to get a guy like that. And we saw last year too, they traded for Jack Jones and they were able to coach him up. Nate Hobbs is a very good slot corner. I think they have the defensive staff to do that. So Olu Fashanu is a top 10 player. I say we play at value here.
Yeah, the DJ Fluker was penciled in as a Raiders starting offensive lineman until about like 2 weeks ago. So they need serious help here. So let's go with him. I want to circle back real quick. We have a question here from Steve-O. What makes Brock Bowers better than Jatavian Sanders? Now, Jatavian Sanders in some circles is the tight end too. He's slipping in other rankings. What makes Brock Bowers better than just these other tight ends, I'll say, than any others? What makes him the clear tight end 1, would you say, Ian?
I would say just his ability as a 3-level athlete, right? I think him and Sanders are somewhat similar in the mold that they play, right? They're both weapons more so than tight ends, right? I think Sanders, his inline blocking can improve. So can Bowers. Bowers just doesn't have the size to be a consistent inline blocker. But I think Jatavian Sanders isn't quite as explosive as an athlete or fast as an athlete. Brock Bowers, when he's on the vertical plane, he can legitimately generate separation. He can legitimately warp tackling angles with that speed and burst in open field. You can see that from him. And then I think the contact balance too, through contact. I think Jatavian Sanders is physical, but I think Brock Bowers takes it another level with his leg churn and his just domineering physicality working downhill. I think Brock Bowers is a more nuanced route runner right now, especially on in-breakers, right? He can hinge around very tight angles and separate and channel explosiveness out of breaks. I think Bowers is a little bit better at attacking the football at the catch point, right? Jatavian Sanders is good there, right? Up the seam in the red zone. But I think Bowers takes it to another level with his overall consistency and then applying that while weaponizing his elite athleticism. So it's tough. They're kind of similar, being weapons more so than tight ends. But to me, Brock Bowers, all of the ceiling elements and the floor elements, he's just a little bit higher for me. So, that's kind of the way it is. Jatavian Sanders is still, I think he snuck just inside my top 100, my 98th overall player. So if you need a big slot and you're not willing to draft Bowers that high, that's a good, consolation prize. Ben Sinnott from Kansas State is another one I like a lot. He's a very fluid route runner. He's very versatile. He can play H-back or inline big slot. And then Jared Wiley from TCU is another one I like a lot. So there's options for sure. But Brock Bowers just has different athleticism, functional athleticism, usage, versatility. And then again, that rack ability in the modern NFL, it's truly unmatched. So I think the upside with him is kind of what you're banking on.
Let's go to 14 here. We've got the New Orleans Saints. There's, again, another team that I think could go in any number of directions, but a lot of people have been focusing in on offensive line. Trevor Penning was a first-round pick 2 years ago. He's already been benched. I mean, it seems like the Saints are ready to just move on from him entirely. They played James Hurst at left tackle. They played Andres Pete at left tackle instead of playing Trevor Penning last year. Then at right tackle, Ryan Ramczyk has been an outstanding player throughout his career and multi-time All-Pro. But it sounds like his knee injury is maybe not going to let him play this year, which I assume would mean his career might be over. So I think that's kind of a glaring area that I think the Saints just might have to address here in round 1.
Yeah, for sure. Every mock that I do, tackle is the first one that stands out to me. I know you could get Bowers if he dropped that far. There are a few defensive positions. Edge rusher could use an overhaul, right? Corner, maybe. We know they like taking corners early as well. So I know they signed Isaac Yiadom, I believe. No, maybe it was someone else, but they have Alontae Taylor, they have Paulson Adebo, but they were a little more volatile last year. So you could get a corner. We still got both the top guys here, but it would be very hard to steer me away from offensive tackle because, like you said, looking at what they have from a needs perspective, I think they need both potentially, and you got to get a guy in there no matter what. Left tackle, right tackle, just get someone. So ideally, Olu Fashanu would have been the guy. So I think if you're the Saints, it's a little tough that he goes before your pick. But you still have talent. You've got Amarius Mims. You've got Taliese Fuaga. You've got J.C. Latham as well. So there are options here to consider. It's just a matter of what balance you're looking for.
So who would you like here? would you consider Fuaga, Mims, and Latham the three primary guys if you were the Saints? So those are the three guys you're deciding between?
Yeah, for sure. And there's trade-offs with each of them. Amarius Mims stands out to me because he's got the left-right versatility, right?
Mm,
JC Latham and Fuaga are both more natural right tackles. But the problem with Mims is that he's very talented, right? And I think for his age is a little bit better than you would expect at acquiring leverage, dropping the anchor and, placing his extensions, right? But his injury history is pretty concerning. I think he needed tightrope surgery at one point, and then when he was able to get on the field, he wasn't able to stay on the field. There were multiple games throughout the year where he had to leave early because he got banged up, right? So
mhm.
the durability is a big question mark with him. And it's for the Saints who've had that question with Ramchick and Penning. That's not something you want to keep dipping into, right? It's a little trepidatious for sure.
It
So
is.
that's the one hang up for me. But again, I can't deny the talent. The left-right versatility is really appealing to me. Taliese Fuaga, though, I look at him and his tape. He's not quite as long as Mims, and that can cause issues with his outside hand placement and pass protection. But he's an explosive run blocker. He launches out in space. He's got great range at the second level. He's got great footwork and corrective athleticism too for his size, being around 6'6", 330. Plays with really good pad level and flexibility, and just really well leveraged, really well proportioned player too. I would lean Fuaga here just because the medical history isn't a concern. And I do think
Mhm.
the traits that he has, again, he's a natural right tackle. But when I look at right tackles and I look at them transitioning to left tackle, the tools that I look for, athleticism, coordination, balance, he has all of those things. So I think he could pull it off. So I would go with Fuaga here. I think you have a clean bill of health. You have a very talented player, and you have enough of an operational floor to work with in the day one.
Yeah, I like that pick a lot. And I like Mims too, but I think it'd be better if we could slot him in somewhere where he could develop a little bit. I think
Yeah.
he just has such little experience that going to a team like the Saints, they're going to need somebody who can start this year. I mean, they're going to need somebody who can play from day one. In my mind, that's either Fuaga or Latham, and I'm happy to take Fuaga here at 14. So now we've got the Broncos who have traded back. They got an extra second round pick. They got 46. They let the Colts come up for Bowers. They could. I don't think they're going to take an offensive lineman, at least an offensive tackle. I mean, I guess they could. Garrett Bowles is still on the roster. He's only got 1 year left on his contract, but they did sign Mike McGlinchey in free agency last year to a pretty big deal. You could always use an edge rusher. I think that's a possibility. I think if you want to dip down to Johnny Newton or Byron Murphy and add another interior presence, you signed Zach Allen last year. I think that's a possibility. But I keep coming back to cornerback. And just the idea of adding somebody to play with Patrick Surtain really stands out to me, especially you've got Terrell and Quinyon Mitchell. You've kind of got your pick here of the top cornerbacks. That would entice me if I were the Broncos. Is that what you would lean, Ian, or would you think something else for Denver?
Man, the Broncos, man. Every time they make a pick, it's like a buffet, but you can only take one thing. It's tough. It's torture. It really is because there's so many ways I want to strengthen this roster, but I can only spend one pick on it. It's fun to think about the corners, right? And I remember there was a graphic that went on Twitter for PFN, pairing Patrick Surtain with Quinyon Mitchell. And that's one of the most exciting pairings that I can think of because on one side, you got Pat Surtain, who's very good at man coverage, just suffocating wide receivers and dissuading QBs from throwing their way. And then on the other side, you've got Quinyon Mitchell, who is the consummate ball hawk. I mean, the closing speed, the ball skills, he can feast with that kind of combination. So it's very fun to think about, but there's so many other spots. And then quarterback as well.
Yeah.
Is this a point where you take a quarterback? Because again, you're probably not going to be able to get it at a different spot. Bo Nix, this would be a reach for me. From a pure talent perspective, he's my 35th overall player, but the scheme fit with Sean Payton is really appealing to me because what are the things that he excels at, right? He's a very good creator. He's a very good athlete, first off, but he's also in structure a very good distributor, ball handler. He can work the middle of the field. He can work the short range. The one thing that Peyton hated about Russell Wilson was that he was big play hunting too much. He was passing up the easy stuff to try and look downfield and not keeping the offense on schedule. I think that's one of the biggest strengths of Nix is keeping things on schedule, accurate, precise with his throwing, decisive, right? There are a few instances where his footwork can be a little more disciplined at the top of his drop. But if you want to get a quarterback, right? If you really want to get a quarterback, you've got that second rounder from the Colts now. So you can use that on a premier player at a different position. If you really want a quarterback, you either trade back to the 20s or you take one here. It's tough for me, though. It's tough for me because there are so many players that could improve the roster. Johnny Newton, Quinyon Mitchell, you could take a tackle if you wanted to, a receiver. I mean, the possibilities are endless for the Broncos, and that's what makes it so agonizing.
It does. And it's, you hear that the 2025 quarterback class is not great, and you would know far better than I if that's the case. But I don't know. To me, this just seems like such a real rebuilding year that I would probably eschew quarterback and just try and get a real top end player on the roster and just hope that, quarterbacks emerge every offseason. I mean, Jayden Daniels didn't look like a top 2 pick at this point last year, right? So like to say that the Broncos couldn't get a quarterback maybe in the next year's draft, I think is maybe not correct. I don't know. Knicks would seem like such a reach to me.
Yeah.
He would just seem like such a reach to me. And Deion Cooper says it here too. You will waste his first 2 years. I totally agree. I totally agree that you will basically, you're not taking advantage of this cheap rookie contract that is so valuable in the NFL. You're not going to be able to get anything. You're burning up the half of that value just given the state of how your roster is. So for me, I would consider trading back again, but we've already done that in this mock draft. If I stuck here, I'd probably go with a defensive player and just choose the best guy that I think is available here instead of a quarterback. But it's not to say that I couldn't understand the argument for a quarterback in theory, because you just, quarterbacks get pushed up. You're here, you can draft one. There are guys available. If you feel like a guy fits your scheme, I can understand that. To me, it's too early for Bo Nix.
Yeah. So then where do you go on the defensive side? That's the question. I agree. I think it's a little bit too much of a reach for Bo Nix. I would go, and next year's QB class, I mean, there is upside for sure. I think Carson back from Georgia showed a lot of good things. Anticipation. He's got the arm talent for sure. He's good in the pocket. Shadur Sanders is kind of a wild card at Colorado, but he does have the talent, right? He does have the accuracy. And then, like you said, there is the potential energy for someone to break out and emerge that we didn't know about. So, there is that. For the Broncos, Johnny Newton is my best overall defender remaining. He's my 12th overall prospect. Interior defensive line is a big need for them. He's explosive, flexible. He's alignment versatile as well. But then you've got Terrion Arnold is my highest remaining. He's my 10th overall player. So that's actually even more compelling than Quinyon Mitchell, because Vance Joseph, a lot of exotic blitz looks, man coverage to kind of delay route stems. Terrion Mitchell is very good in man coverage, man. He's got that, corrective athleticism, the physicality, and he's got great ball skills too, supportability. So I'm actually leaning Terrion Arnold here. He's the top overall defender for me. He's the top remaining corner, and he really fits the scheme and what they want to do.
Yeah, I think that's the way I would go too. It just makes too much sense, I think, to kind of get a lockdown cornerback situation, and that could potentially be within maybe not year 1, but within year 2, you're looking at maybe you have the NFL's best cornerback tandem, right? I think that's the upside here that you're hoping for with Arnold. So let's go with him there at 15.
And the fun part with Arnold too is that he can play the slot situationally as well. I know they have Jaquan McMillan, who broke out this past year, but he's
I love him. I love McMillan. He's so much fun to watch.
He's fun for sure. But with Arnold, if you have a bigger receiver like 6'1", 6'2", he's got almost 32-inch arms, so you can get him in there in the slot in those situations, and you can mix and match a little bit. So it gives you flexibility, high on talent. I love it.
Okay. We're halfway through here. We're at pick 16. Seattle Seahawks. It's a unique situation, right? Pete Carroll is gone. GM John Schneider has been there for a long time, but he's calling the shots. He's finally calling the personnel shots for the first time. They've got a new head coach in Mike McDonald, who comes from Baltimore. He's their defensive coordinator. He ran that pretty modern defensive scheme. So does he go out and target a player who he thinks is a perfect fit for that scheme, or does Schneider say, no, we need something else? We need an offensive player. We need something else. I feel like this one's like, you talked about the Broncos have like wide open. I feel like the Seahawks are wide open too. Like there's really only a few positions. Like I would say, no, they're not taking that. There's any number of positions I'd feel comfortable taking in Seattle.
Yeah, for sure. They could go edge even if you wanted to as well. If they like Jared Verse or whatever, they could go, offensive line is the one that I've usually gravitated to. Jackson Powers Johnson, before the medical concerns came out, that was one that was fun. But Graham Barton, I know we had a comment saying Graham Barton. I agree. That would be a phenomenal fit because he can play guard or center. So you have needs at both spots. I think they signed a guard. They signed Laken Tomlinson recently, which they just did. That doesn't really move the needle for me because he's struggled to stay healthy over the past few years. I think you need to get a guy in there who has positional versatility. You could go Cooper DeJean as well. I know he was on a visit for the Seahawks. He had a truncated visit schedule because of his injury and his rehab, but that would be a really fun fit as well in Mike McDonald's defense because he can play the slot safety. He projects really well to safety, but cover 3 corner, he can play that too. But I'm leaning Graham Barton here just because it's a slight reach on my board. He's my 24th overall player, but he's a top 25 guy. And I think the positional versatility and the security is really what wins this over for me, because he's athletic. He's a road grader in the run game, but then in pass protection too, really good footwork, hand usage, awareness on blitz threats. And he's got the flexibility and the recovery capacity where I think he's got a really nice corrective fail-safe early on too. So my gut is saying Graham Barton, get that offensive line security, especially with Geno Smith, right? You want him to sustain that momentum. You want to get the offense humming with Ryan Grubb. I think this kind of allows you to do that.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I think Ryan Grubb would probably hope that Troy Fontenot falls here and he can get the guy that he knows from Washington. But I think Graham Barton is a nice kind of second place prize here. And Graham Barton's interesting. I mean, he's got a lot of positional flexibility that I think could be valuable for the Seahawks, who, their interior situation is not great. I mean, Anthony Bradford, who was a 4th-round pick last year, started 10 games. He's probably going to be a starter at right guard. You mentioned Lakeland Tomlinson. They drafted Olu Oluwatimi last year, who I think a lot of people did like at center, but we don't really know what his progress is going to be. I think Barton's a really good pick, and he could play tackle too, because Abraham Lucas and Charles Cross both missed a lot of time last year. So if you want a guy who is that true insurance policy, I think Graham Barton makes a lot of sense. I can't get off that Cooper DeJean fit though, because man, could he be the new Kyle Hamilton for Mike McDonald? Could he be the new Daxton Hill? Right, he is that guy.
It would be so fun.
But it would be, but. They also have Julian Love, who I think is a pretty fun guy at safety. They've got other options there. Whereas I think Graham Barton is a guy at a premium position who can really help them in a lot of different spots as far as depth. So I'm very comfortable going with him there.
And I will say, if you need a strong safety to complement Julian Love, this class has a lot of guys. Tyler Nubin, Cole Bishop, Bo Braid, Adrian Taylor-Demerson, more of a free safety, but Jaden Hicks from Washington State would be a really good fit too. So you've got options if you decide to wait on that.
For sure. Okay. Jaguars at 17. There's some needs here. There's some obvious needs here. I think cornerback is a need, even though they did add Darnell Savage, who I think is going to play the slot. They added Ronald Darby. They still have Tyson Campbell, who was injured a lot last year, but I think they did a long-term option there. And then receiver, they signed Gabe Davis, but they lost Calvin Ridley. I mean, they really tried to bring him back, but they lost him to the Titans. I don't think you necessarily want to open up 2024 with, Gabe Davis and Christian Kirk and Zay Jones as your starting 3 wide receivers. So for me, I think even if it's a reach, you have to consider the wide receivers who are available in this spot, even if it's a reach. But I think there are needs at cornerback. I think you could consider an edge rusher if you wanted to. There are other spots I think that make more sense for value than a receiver, even if I do think that's a pretty big need.
Yeah, for sure. It's tough waiting on a receiver to round 2, because I feel like that 30 to 45 range is where a run on receivers is going to happen, right? So it's kind of precarious waiting for that. But at the same time, too, you have a big need at corner, and we have a top 16 player, Quinyon Mitchell, who's still on the board, who I think is a decent fit for Ryan Nielsen. There is a little bit of projection involved with his press man ability, and that's a big part of Nielsen's scheme. So that's a little precarious, too. But off-man zone, he's one of the best in the class. He's probably the best in off-man and zone, actually, with his ability to click and close and react to breaks instantly with the closing speed and the ball skills. And then at the Senior Bowl, I think he showed he could do press man. There's still some sequencing issues with his footwork where he gives a little bit too much depth on releases, but you have the willing physicality. You have the nice frame dimensions as well. So my gut is saying Quinyon Mitchell. I think he's the best balance of need and value. You could consider a guy like A.D. Mitchell, right? But again, there's a little too much uncertainty there for me to pick him this early. So yeah, and it's tough.
Yeah, I mean, he keeps getting pushed up. Yeah, he keeps getting pushed up the board, right? I mean, you could see it, but yeah,
and the athletic profile is there too. 6'2", 205, 4.35 speed, right? So, and the route running is very good too. I think the biggest thing is going to be getting him in that room and deciding character-wise, like consistency-wise, right? Because there have been varying reports about the cause of that and the effort, not 100% all the time. So that's where the variations and the volatility comes into play for the evaluation. Because I think purely as a player, right?
Yeah,
would be a phenomenal fit, would be a phenomenal talent for Trevor Lawrence, who likes those bigger guys going back to his college days. It's just a matter of, would you rather do that over Quinyon Mitchell, who's probably more likely to be a game changer early on and more often at the defensive side.
Yeah, and like you said, just from a game theory perspective, right? I think you feel better about getting a round 2 wide receiver than you do a round 2 cornerback. So just from that perspective, it probably makes sense to go with Mitchell here. All right, Cincinnati Bengals. I think the need is an offensive tackle. I host a PFN Bengals podcast here at PFN with Jay Morrison, who's our Bengals beat reporter. We've done many, many mock drafts, and our feeling is that it's going to be offensive tackle in round 1. They signed Trent Brown to a 1-year contract, but it was a very cheap contract for one, which makes me think the Bengals are still very much in the right tackle market. And talk about guys that miss games. He does not often complete full seasons. So I think you can get a guy who can be your long-term right tackle, maybe even compete with Cordell Volson at left guard in year one if Trent Brown solidifies right tackle. So that's the way I'm going, is I am just clicking on the offensive tackle button, and I am picking one of these guys right here from this range: Amarius Mims, J.C. Latham, Tyler Guyton, whoever's the best guy left on the board. If I were running the Bengals, that would be my pick at 18.
For sure. And real quick, we have a question. Would the Giants trade down from Slasher? Would the Giants trade down with the Vikings, get extra capital? I could see the Giants maybe trading down if they can't get a top quarterback. I don't think it would be with the Vikings, though. I think in that scenario, the Vikings are a team that trades up to 4 or 5 to leapfrog the Giants to get a QB. So I don't think the Vikings would be that team. It could be a team that's very high on. Here's the tough part, too. The Giants would probably pass up on Rome Odunze and Malik Neighbors, right? So you're probably trading down with the team who's more inclined to get that guy. So a lot of factors that go into it. But if the Giants decide they want to punt on a QB, that could be an option for you. It's just you pass up talent at one of your biggest positions of need. That's the uncertainty there. So I could see them trading down for sure. They have enough needs where I could see it being an option. But, just with the amount of receiver talent on the board, it's tough to pass up one of those guys for sure. So
it is. And I think Walt makes an interesting comment here, is you do have to think about it as big these head coaches and GMs and keeping their positions. That's a big factor in a lot of these picks. The Giants did not have a good year last year, right? I wouldn't say Joe Schoen and Brian Daboll have the best job security in the world. I'm not sure how great it would look if you pass up on Rome Odunze or Malik Neighbors, and then those guys go out in year one and have a Jamar Chase, rookie year. It's going to look pretty bad if you passed up on those guys. So I think just optically, I think it'd be hard for them to pass up on one of those top wide receiver prospects, assuming that's what they want to do.
Yeah, for sure. And, while we're on the offensive tackle topic for the Bengals, Steve-O asks thoughts about Kingsley Suamataia from BYU. He is my OT 8. I want to say he's in my top 45 fringe first round guy. I'm a big fan of the talent with him, the explosiveness, the Mauler mentality in the run game for sure. And I do think as a pass protector, there are bright flashes of synergy and footwork and hand usage. I think for him, I wanted to see more consistency, and I still think we're working to that point. I think, he's got left-right versatility. He's got the athleticism, the length, and the power, all very appealing traits for him. But there are times where he'll short arm punches a little bit. There are times where he doesn't have elite length. And because of that, he'll overextend past the center of gravity. He'll lurch forward, and that can impact his balance too and recovery. So I think, and he doesn't quite have the elite flexibility that I would say, a Tyler Guyton has. I think that's one reason that I'm a little higher on Guyton, even though he's a little raw in the hand usage department, is he is incredibly flexible with his hip flexibility, his hinge flexibility, swivel freedom, recovery. Suamataia is a little bit denser, a little bit more compact, and you see some stiffness there. But overall, I really like the athletic upside. I like the versatility. I think he could be a future starter and a good one. There are some balance and hand usage issues that he's still chipping away at, though. So 18th overall would be a little rich for me. I think at 18th overall, you're probably confined to, like you said, Dallas, Amarius Mims, J.C. Latham, and there's probably Guyton would be a reach here for me too. So I think Limbs and Latham and Mims, I combined them for a second there. Latham and Mims would probably be the way to go. So it's just a matter of, do you want the young guy? I think this is a really great situation to let Mims sit, like you said earlier. But Latham also probably projects better at guard if you want him to replace Volson right away. So it's a tricky call.
Mm-hmm. It is, right? And I think, is there a concern that Latham is like physically maxed out? Did he max out at Alabama? Does Mims have that upside that maybe Latham doesn't have, which is what DJ just said here in our comment? I think the Bengals are in a position where they can maybe take a chance and let Mims develop because they signed Trent Brown. But, you look at the Bengals track record of drafting offensive tackles, Cedric Ogbuehi, Jake Fisher, Jackson Carman. It's not great. And that makes me think maybe they would go with the guy who's maybe they want to hit a double instead of trying to hit the home run. And to me, J.C. Latham might be the double, whereas Mims is the home run, but you might strike out. So for me, I think it would be Latham just to kind of get that, not saying he's going to be a midline player, but I think your floor is a little higher than it is with Mims. If I'm the Bengals and I've had so much bad luck with offensive tackles, I think I'm taking that safety over Mims at this point.
And you're the Bengals podcast guy, so I'll let you make the decision. You're the GM here.
Oh, thank you. How nice of you.
I'll give you that. I'll give you that courtesy.
I appreciate it. I appreciate that. All right, Rams here at 19. We've already had some talk here about the Rams. Would they trade up for Latu? He's still on the board. He's still on the board if they want to add him to that now Aaron Donald-less defensive line. I think a lot of people have Byron Murphy pegged in here as like a true Aaron Donald replacement. Obviously, no one's going to replace Aaron Donald as one of the best defensive tackles in NFL history, but from a body type perspective, from a positional perspective, I think that makes sense. Offensive tackle, maybe. Rob Havenstein at right tackle is getting a little older. Alaric Jackson is a former undrafted free agent who's a restricted free agent this year. I wouldn't call him an exactly solidified long-term option. Do they want to add more defensive back talent? They signed Tre'Davious White. They signed Cam Curl. They've really boosted that defensive backfield in free agency, but they could get another option there. There's a lot of places here I think they could go. And left unsaid is that the Rams are making their first round pick, and God, it feels like 30 years here. So do they even stick here? Do they trade back? I think there's a lot of ways they could go. What would you do if you're picking for the Rams here?
It's tough. I think the best option for them is to get one of those edge guys that are clustered here. I think Latu, and Chop Robinson make the most sense for the scheme. I do think Jared Verse can fit, but he's a little more of a 5-tech, 4-point stance guy who can play really good in run defense, really good speed to power. But for me, if I'm looking at a stand-up edge rusher from 2-point stances, wider alignments, 7-tech, wide 9, I want guys who have the speed and bend to rush underneath the arc. And for me, Latu and Chop Robinson fit that the best. And I think with the Rams, you already have a guy who's a pretty good rotational guy, in Byron Young, right? And no one's going to mistake him for a full-time starter. But I would feel better if you asked me 50 times, if you asked me 100 times, I would probably pick Robinson 45 times and Latu 55 times. So it's close, but I would feel better about the immediate utility as a pass rusher that Latu has. His pass rushing bag is one of the deepest that I've seen. He's got the counter work. He's got instant reaction quickness. And then for a guy who's 6'5", 260, he can run the arc, man. People talk about the hand usage, and that's the best part of his game, but it's a way. The hand usage isn't just a trait. It's a medium through which he weaponizes that burst, that flexibility, and that ability to run the arc and shorten the corner and sustain acceleration through reps. So his ability to finish with those high-end physical traits is really what makes him special. So there are some medicals to take into account, but he's a local product for Los Angeles, and I think he fits the need. I think he fits the profile. For me, it's really tough to pass up on Latu here.
It is for me too. My only kind of concern, I did see the mock draft from Peter Schrager over at NFL Network that said, if the Rams don't trade back, you can mark it down that Sean McVay will take an offensive player here at 19. Yeah. I don't know how accurate that is, but you could see it. But I think Latu is a great pick here because you're at the point in the draft here, I think mid-first round, where you can take that risk on a medical concern, right? If I'd have more concerns taking him in the top 10 and the opportunity cost of taking him over some of these other players that we had going in the top 10. I think here in the middle of the first round, you're more likely to take that risk, especially in a Rams defense that has a lot of younger, interesting guys who can kind of set a baseline. I think you can take a chance on a guy with the upside of Latu and just cross your fingers and hope that those injury problems don't pop up again.
Yeah, and to your point, guys like Kobe Turner was a third-round pick. Darius Williams, who they re-signed, I believe he was originally an undrafted free agent, I think. So I think the Rams have proven that they can find guys and coach them up. So there isn't a lot of pressure to make the exact right decision with this first rounder to fit so many different needs with this first rounder. Just pick the guy who's the best fit and the best player on your board, and they've proven that they can get guys in the later rounds. I mean, Puka Nacua, anyone, right? I think if that's one thing that's allowed the Rams to maintain to become a threat and stay a threat, it's their ability to draft on day 2 and day 3. So you can make up for the things that you pass on here, and Latu is a premier pass rushing threat on day 1. So I really like that.
If the Steelers are at 20, I think it could go in a number of different directions. I think cornerback would be potentially an option. They took Joey Porter last year in the second round, but I think they could still potentially get an option there. They did acquire Dante Jackson from the Panthers when they traded Deontay Johnson there. Offensive tackle, I think, is just another area where we have to think about. We talked earlier about the idea of the Steelers maybe trading up to get an offensive tackle. Here, they do have Amarius Mims on the board if they wanted to go with that. They drafted Broderick Jones in the first round last year. They still have Dan Moore, who is not exactly an all-pro at left tackle, right?
Yeah,
I think he's a below average left tackle. He's going to be a below average right tackle if that's where he plays. I think there's room for improvement there if the Steelers want to go offensive tackle, but I think there are other spots they could go to.
This will be simple for me. Quinyon Mitchell's not on the board. Brian Thomas Jr. is not on the board. Those would be the guys that I would consider here if they were, but now that they're not, it's Amarius Mims. Rob said in the chat, Mims all day. I mean, come on. He can play left tackle or right tackle. You're reuniting him with Broderick Jones and Darnell Washington. There are injury concerns to take into account, but again, like we said earlier, he's a guy who, for his age, there are some hand usage things I think you can still improve at being more natural as an independent hand usage player and a counter, artist. But I do think for his age, two things that you look for: leverage acquisition, base, extension placement, and timing. He's very good in those categories. And then the physical profile, 6'8", 340, looks like a move tight end. The upside is through the roof. And I think he fits the profile of what the Steelers like: bigger, more athletic guys who can impose their will and pave open lanes. So I really like the fit here. I think it's a perfect fit. And I think especially there isn't a lot of competition across the board, the way the board is falling right now.
Yep, agreed. I think the Dolphins would be, again, pretty upset with that pick because they need offensive linemen. I wouldn't say as badly as they did going into the offseason, because they did kind of paper it over. They signed some guys that they can help them up front, but I think a long-term option at either tackle or guard could still be in the mix. They have Teron Armstead at left tackle, but he was flirting with retirement as of a few weeks ago. So I think a long-term left tackle could make sense if they wanted to go with a Tyler Guyton with a Sua Matia here. Could they go with an interior option potentially? Or would they go with defense? They lost Christian Wilkins? He signed a massive contract with the Raiders this offseason. We've got Johnny Newton here. We've got Byron Murphy available. Would they want to get more edge depth? They already have quite a few edge defenders, but a lot of them are dealing with injuries. What do you see here for the Dolphins, Ian?
Man, it's tough. I think the two players that I'm looking at here, I think the offensive line board didn't fall very well for them. Ideally you're getting a versatile guy, but Graham Barton's off the board. Troy Fatano's off the board. Those are kind of my top guys for the Dolphins. So you don't have that. Looking at the defensive line group, I'm looking at Jared Verse or Byron Murphy II. Johnny Newton is actually the top DT on my board, but looking at what the Dolphins need in that scheme, and I guess looking at it further, they did sign Tyler Tart, they did sign Benito Jones. So you've got it's a really tough choice, Dion, to get all three of these guys and to try and choose one. It's tough. It's like choosing your favorite son. I don't want to do it, but I have to do it. So I think now that they've gotten Tart, actually, I think Tyler Tart is a guy who can play one tech and encumber blocks a little bit more on the interior. I think that frees them up to get a guy like Byron from like Johnny Newton. I think Byron Murphy II is a little bit better at holding up and run defense at those interior spots, one tech and 2i. But Johnny Newton to me is the better 3-tech penetrator, and he can move out to 5-tech as well. He's got the explosion, the flexibility, the hand usage, and he's pretty good in run defense too. He's a high IQ player. He can stack and shed. He can encumber blocks in one gap. There's a lot to like with him. So I think I'm going to go with DT. That's kind of my gut feeling here, Dallas.
Yeah.
It's tough because I don't want to pass up Jared Verse. They have a lot of injury concerns at the edge spot, but
they do.
Yeah. But I think,
it's tough. It's a really tough pick. I wish we had Adam Beasley here right now to make this pick for us. I think he'd have a better idea of where to go. It's tough. I mean, I think I would pass on edge just because, they've got Bradley Chubb. They've got Shaq Barrett. They've got Jalen Phillips. They do have options, even if a lot of those guys have injury questions. I could see them taking Newton, honestly. I think you lose a guy like Wilkins. I think you want to restock that defensive line. I think at 21, this is a good spot for Newton, who I think honestly could go earlier as much as teams are valuing interior pressure at this point. I could see him and Murphy even going earlier than we have him here. So I would be fine with sending them to Miami right now and just have him kind of fill that Christian Wilkins gap. Maybe not in year one, but maybe by year two, he's become that Wilkins kind of player.
Yeah, let's go with Newton. I think what he provides, I still think he's underrated. He's a top 15 player for me. He's got the hand usage, he's got the IQ, he's got the explosion. But to me, what makes him truly special is that hyper elite flexibility. This is a guy who I remember I was watching Penn State this past year, and he had a rep where he lined up at 5-tech, face up against the tackle, and he did a Euro step and cut outside and won around the tackle with ankle flexion under 3 seconds. Like, that's insane. You don't see a 6'2", 300-pound guy do that very often. So he's got the flexibility not only to rush from those alignments, but also pry through gaps and finish rushes. I don't see that torso flexibility with Byron Murphy the same way I do with Newton. So I think it's a trait that can really make him a game changer on the defensive front. So Miami, that's an exciting one.
Yeah, I like that fit a lot. I think that makes a lot of sense. 22 Eagles. I think that Amarius Mims could have maybe been an easy pick for the Eagles here. I really like that fit as a long-term replacement for Lane Johnson. Wouldn't have to play right away. Unfortunately, he's off the board. If the Eagles want to go, they always go trenches, it feels like. Howie Roseman, I don't think has ever taken a first-round corner, even though they need a corner. I don't think the guys are here at the end of the first round. Maybe they would take Nate Wiggins. Maybe they would take a Kool-Aid McKinstry, but I don't know. Eagles always focus on the trenches, and I just keep coming back to there, whether it's an interior offensive lineman, whether it's a tackle, whether it's a defensive tackle, whether it's an edge defender. I keep coming back to those trenches, and maybe that's just relying too much on trends and not what they actually need this year, but that's where I'm at. Where are you at on the Eagles?
I would go trenches. Howie Roseman has proven that he values that in round one a lot. And, they have Lane Johnson who's getting older. You could go Tyler Guyton here. That would be a reach to me. And that's what I was thinking, DJ. That's what I was thinking. I'll get to it in a minute. But Tyler Guyton's a reach to me. I think you could go edge, but you've got Bryce Huff. You got Josh Sweat you extended. Yeah. You have Nolan Smith, who you spent a first rounder on last year, and he's got upside for sure in that scheme. I think with Hassan Reddick moving on now, you can kind of utilize him and not siphon reps away from him. So I look at Cooper DeJean, like DJ said, and I think in that Vic Fangio scheme, that is a perfect fit for him, man. You're talking more zone coverages off of those exotic blitz looks. He's great in cover 3 in zone. He can play field safety as well. He can play in the nickel position too against big tight ends. I think that's a scheme where he can be a game changer, where he can be a true impact player, a chess piece on that defensive secondary for sure. I think, as a guy who played corner and is transitioning to safety, there are questions and people ask about that, right? I don't think he's great in every alignment as a corner. I do think, as a press man guy, being 6 foot, over 200, he can be a little muscle bound and stiff in the hips at times on sharp redirections and lateral changes. But as a cover 3 guy who can play in side saddle with his eyes to the QB, that's where he excels because he can click and close, he can trigger quickly, he can make plays on the ball. And then as a field safety too, his eyes are always to the QB. I'm salivating thinking about what he can do. And then he'll play at 210 pounds, so he can come downhill and enforce and support too. He can be a blitzing threat. I think for Vic Fangio, that is the perfect prototypical chess piece for you. So Cooper DeJean, let's go with that. I think that's a phenomenal fit. I think that's worth breaking the trend of trenches. I think that's worth going against the grain.
Yeah, and we saw Howie Roseman sign a running back this offseason, so there's no saying he won't go against his trends, right? So is there any concern that there's too much overlap with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, who the Eagles did re-sign this offseason? He's kind of that slot, versatile safety kind of player that maybe DeJean is. Is there any concern that there's too much overlap between those guys?
I don't think so. I think they're different enough where you can have them shift around and still fulfill different roles. I think with Cooper DeJean, I project him to more of a cover 3 corner, right? If you're in cover 3 looks on longer downs where you're in off coverage, I think he can go on the boundary, and then he can play field safety and box safety when you're not. I think Chauncey, I was trying to say the acronym, but it's actually easier to say his name, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. He can play slot, and I think he can play field safety as well. I think, you play it on a situational basis, but Cooper DeJean can also enforce in the box, and he can play right up against the tight end in line or even in the slot and, hold the line on the boundary as well. So I don't think there's too much overlap. There is a little overlap, but I think the right defensive mind, which I think Fangio is definitely that, can scheme them into positions where they can play off each other on a situational basis.
Yeah. Yep, I like that pick a lot. So let's go with DeJean here at 22 for the Eagles. So now with the Cardinals, who they traded back. They've picked up pick number 23 here from the Vikings. They've already gotten Brian Thomas, so they've already kind of filled that wide receiver void. What else do they need, Ian? I mean, what do you see here? There's Jared Verse, who is our top-ranked player here at 15 at edge that could definitely be, I think, of value to the Cardinals. Lots of good defensive players here. I think they could consider an offensive lineman like JPJ, maybe. I think otherwise, I think you're probably looking at this group of defenders right here and kind of saying, what do we value the most? Do we value that edge player? Do we value that interior pressure in Murphy? Or do we want to go out and get a cornerback? The Cardinals have needed a cornerback for several seasons. Do they go out and get a Nate Wiggins, a Khalid McKinstry? I think there's a lot of options here for the Cardinals at 23.
Yeah, and I think the good part is you do have that 27th pick, so you don't have to fill every need right now. So it's about looking at the board and who's not going to be there. So let's take a look at the teams that pick between the Cardinals actually right now. So we've got the Cowboys at 24. We've got the Packers at 25 and the Buccaneers at 26. I think the Buccaneers are definitely an edge threat. I think Verse could be gone at that point. I think you look at the Packers, they might take Nate Wiggins too, although he might not be long enough. He might not fit their size parameters. So that's a tough call too. I think Wiggins could be there at 27. I don't think Verse could be there. Byron Murphy the second is the wild card. The Cowboys could take him, right? But, I think there's a good chance that Murphy or Wiggins could be there at 27. I don't think you can say the same for Verse. So thinking about it like that, Jared Verse makes a lot of sense to me. I think going in that scheme his speed to power game is so imposing. He's explosive. He's got very good shock in his hands and run defense too. Byron Murphy II is a fun player, and I think he'll have a chance to be there at 27. So this is me playing GM, trying to play the board. Maybe I'll get burned by it, but I think they need an infusion in that edge room. That edge room, has some quality players, but I don't think you have a guy with versus impact. I think Verse right away, very good hand fighter, very good run defender, and that speed to power game can crunch the pocket and make life easier for other defenders who can play off you. I think Jared Verse adds that element to you, that disruptive element. Let's go with Verse. Let's run that card in.
Yeah. Yep. I like that one a lot. I like that pick a lot. Okay. 24, the Dallas Cowboys basically did nothing this offseason. I think their only external free agent signing was Eric Kendricks, who's a 32-year-old linebacker. They still have a lot of needs. They lost Tyron Smith at left tackle. They lost Tyler Biotish at center. They don't really have a starting running back if the season started today. They have an opening at corner because Stephon Gilmore is a free agent and Trevon Diggs is recovering from an ACL injury. There's a lot of holes here. I think that the Cowboys would have liked to get an offensive tackle, one of those top guys that we've already taken off the board, and maybe that would have allowed them to keep Tyler Smith at left guard, where he was a second-team All-Pro last year. I don't know if they would value Tyler Guyton at this point as a guy that they could drop in there as an offensive lineman. I'm not sure. I think Adam Kaplan, our PFN NFL insider, had Tyler Guyton going to the Cowboys in his most recent mock draft. But I think there are other spots they could target too. I mean, you mentioned Murphy. They could think about him. I don't know about an edge rusher, but I think corner potentially. If you don't think you're going to re-sign Stephon Gilmore, maybe that's an option. I guess we could throw out quarterback if Dak Prescott's not going to re-sign, but I think that would be a reach at this point. What do you think here for Dallas?
Wide receiver is one that's kind of calling to me. Yeah, I mean they got CeeDee Lamb, they got Brandon Cooks, and if I'm misremembering, who's their next one after that? I think it's
Jalen Tolbert.
Yes, that's a little precarious, right? So I'm thinking about that. I know the board did not fall very well for the Cowboys. You could take Jackson Powers Johnson. He's a top 25 player for me just off of the film, but the medicals are concerning, and that could push him outside of round one. So it's a matter of, are we willing to bank on that, right? Tyler Guyton could be an option, but he's a natural right tackle. And, with the amount of hand usage improvement that he needs, I would feel a little uncomfortable moving him to left side. As he's acclimating to the NFL. That's a little too much for me. So I would probably go against that. AD Mitchell, and we just got a comment saying AD. That's compelling because we know if there's any team that is willing to take a gamble on these guys who might have a little bit of off-field questions, right? It's the Cowboys. And if there's a guy who fits the profile of what the Cowboys look for, right? There have been some comps to CD, in fact, with AD Mitchell, with just the way that he can run routes and change direction and chop his strides and make plays on the ball, right? That vertical athleticism is very appealing with him. It's just a matter of, are you willing to take that risk? Because it is it's a risk for sure. There's uncertainty there, but that's kind of what I'm feeling because the board didn't fall very well at tackle. JPJ has some medical issues at center. And then the defensive board, right? Corner, I think they're fine. They got Deron Bland, they got Trayvon Diggs, and they re-signed Jordan Lewis who can play the slot. I don't think you need to get a corner round one. I would get one on day 2 or early day 3, but I don't think you need to spend one here. Wide receiver is calling to me, man. It's like that voice inside your head. Wide receiver, go for it. Just make the play. AD Mitchell makes a lot of sense. Xavier Worthy could be a fun one with the speed element that he'd provide. Worthy is higher on my board. I think he's one spot higher. He's a generational speed receiver who knows how to use that speed as a route runner. That's very impressive to me, very exciting. I think he'd add a new element to that offense with Dak Prescott. But AD Mitchell is a little bit, he's got a little more mass, a little sturdier against contact naturally, right? So it's a tough call. It really is. Between those two, who would you be leaning toward?
I think I'd go with Mitchell just because I like the size a little more, and I think the Cowboys do have Brandon Cooks, but I would say that it's almost a guarantee this is going to be his final season in Dallas. I don't know if his contract is up after this year, but even if it's not, I think he'd be a cut candidate. I think wide receiver is a sneaky need here, even if there are other positions. In one of my mocks, I did have the Cowboys reaching for Zach Frazier here, just as like a pure center, and I think JPJ was already off the board in that one, so maybe that's not realistic here, but they do have such big holes along the offensive line that I have kept coming back there. But from a value perspective, now that Mims is not around, Latham is not around, even Graham Barton is not around, a lot of the guys that we've already drafted here, I just don't know if there's that value. So I'm all for going wide receiver. It's not a need that I have been kind of targeting when I've been doing my mocks, but now that you kind of lay it out, I think maybe I should. I think getting a guy like AD Mitchell here, I think would make a lot of sense. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think I like that. I like that fit. You've talked me into it.
That's what I'm here for. Talking, and I see you had a comment about Lad McConkey. This would be a tiny bit high for me for Lad McConkey, but I do think the route running ability, he's a turbocharged technician with his ability to combine that athleticism and kind of parse it with his route running. He doesn't have the wingspan, right? I think he's a little bit more of a guy who's, over the middle of the field, strong hands, versatile, right? But AD Mitchell, to me, gives a little more upside. The Cowboys, I think, are inclined to bank on for sure. So it's tough passing on JPJ too, but for me, it's the kind of gamble that the Cowboys are inclined to take, and that's kind of what leans into it here.
Yeah. Okay. Cowboys here, or Packers at 25. The NFL's youngest roster last year, and still made a little bit of a playoff run. They're bringing back almost all these pieces. They've added Josh Jacobs. They've added Xavier McKinney. I mean, a lot of people are excited, I think, for good reason about this Packers roster. And now you've got this 25th pick and a lot of day 2 and 3 capital, I might add, to kind of fortify this roster. I keep seeing offensive tackle go here. Rasheed Walker was a former 7th round pick who I think held his own at left tackle for the Packers. But I think long-term, maybe you do think about adding another body there, even though the Packers are so good about drafting and developing these mid-round offensive tackles and offensive linemen in general, that maybe you hold off on that. Corner is going to be a need. I think safety is going to be a need, even though you signed to McKinney. The Packers went into this offseason needing 2 safeties. So McKinney is one. You still need another. I don't know if there's a guy here at 25 that would fit, but you could do that. And then I think just any defensive player really could probably fit here for the Packers. What do you think here, Ian?
Yeah, it's difficult. Corner could be one, although Carrington Valentine played pretty well when he was given the opportunity. I think they could try and roll with the athletic tools there. He's a little volatile still, a little competitive and over aggressive, and that can lead to volatility, but he's a fun player. I had him in my top 100, so to see him thrive was very, very exciting, and I think the tools are there to be a starter. They re-signed Keyshawn Nixon as a slot guy as well, so they could go with that. But at the same time, man, you got Kool-Aid McKinstry right there. He's a top 20 player for me still. I'm a big fan of the zone capability, the man capability. Doesn't quite have the vertical speed that some of these other guys do, but he's fluid, competitive, really good ball skills too. So you could go with that. I usually steer clear of offensive tackle. I think Tyler Guyton's a little bit too big for what they prefer. They like guys who are smaller, more agile, like Zach Tom, right?
Zach Tom,
Zach Tom has grown into a really good right tackle, right? So they could stick with Rasheed Walker and Zach Tom. They could go with JPJ because Josh Myers has not been very good, but the Packers aren't also – they're not usually a team that takes injury risks too. So I think they're another one that would pass on JPJ if given the chance. And I could be wrong there, but that's kind of my thought process. I'm leaning – shoot, man, they're a tough team to draft for. They really are. But
they really are. They really are.
You could go defensive tackle too. You've got Byron Murphy II on the board. You've got a few expiring contracts. You've got guys like Colby Wooden and Carl Brooks who played really well rotationally, but I don't think you have a guy like you got Devontae Wyatt for sure. You got Kenny Clark.
Sure. Adding
Byron Murphy II into that rotation, man, that can make that a fun defensive tackle group. And I think especially with Jeff Hafley coming in, more 4-man fronts, right? Byron Murphy II, you got 3-tech who can actually 2-gap, right? That's a fun fit to think about. So the more that I talk about it, we're talking ourselves into things in the human moment, real time. The more I think about it, man, Byron Murphy II. And if you're the Packers, like Brian Gutekunst has proven that he can acquire picks and he can convert on day 2 and day 3. So I think in round 1, it's not a luxury per se, but it's more of it's not an immediate need, but I think it makes your defense better on day 1. So the more I talk myself into it, I'm thinking Byron Murphy, man. I'm thinking he's the one.
You've talked me into it too. Yeah, I think the value is just too good. The value is too good. I really do. I think you could consider any number of other players here, but the value is really good. And Kenny Clark is like sneaky young, even though he's been in the NFL forever because he was so young when he came in. But he's got a lot of snaps on that body, so you don't know how he's always going to hold up. And yeah, I like some of the guys they took last year, especially Brooks. But I think adding another playmaker to that front seven. Really good note on Hafley too, that if you want to put more bodies in coverage, you're going to need these elite kind of guys playing in the interior. So I like Murphy there as well. All right. Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
Yeah, and real quick, we got a question from Walt. What's the difference between Jalen Hyatt and Xavier Worthy? It's a good question because they're both speed-oriented guys. Real quick, I think Worthy is a better route runner. I think Jalen Hyatt was really vertically oriented, and both of them have kind of confounding projections against press coverage because defenses played them with cushion so often because they're speed guys, right? But I think Xavier Worthy, you look at the stem work, right? The ability to press upfield with his vertical speed and then chop those strides. His throttle control for a speed guy who gets so fast is really incredible to me. You know, the way that he's not just a vertical guy, he can throttle up and down at will. He can bend outside of breaks. You know, he can pinch really tight angles on outbreakers and comeback routes. And then he's got good ball tracking on the vertical plane. I think the focus drops can improve a little bit, but he did improve in 2023. And I think he can track and float the ball in the vertical plane. He's got some rack utility too. You know, he's kind of a wiry guy with his frame. You know, he'll bounce off tackles too. So I think a better rack guy and a better route runner. You know, I think Jalen Hyatt definitely had the speed, but even Worthy, his speed is different. And then he's a better football player. So that's why the discrepancy is so big on my board. I think Worthy just provides that ability beyond being a speed guy.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting. That's an interesting question. I do love the comps you make. I wonder where you get some of these. Did you comp someone today on Twitter to Michael Lewis, or was it Michael Lewis? Is that who it was?
It was Michael Lewis. Yep.
I don't know how you came up with that. At first, I thought you were comping him to like the author. I'm like, wait,
yeah,
what's going on here?
I try. Yeah, my philosophy is I try not to force modern comps. If I don't think there's a good comp in the modern age, I'll go back until I see one. And sometimes that takes time to dig and find those guys. But my comp for and I think Rob was a big fan of it when I brought it up, because I told him, he was the first one I told. But my comp for Worthy was Henry Ellard, who played for the Rams back in the 80s and 90s. And I just think a speed guy who knows how to use it with route running, but then has the rack ability too, has the ball tracking. I think, you know, it's representative of how long and fruitful his career can be beyond being just a speed guy, and a return ability too, because I know Ellard was an all-pro as a returner one year. I think Worthy has that ability too. So I think he can be much more than just the speed guy he's been billed as.
Let's go to 26 here with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm thinking defense here. I mean, I guess we could go offensive line. I think that could be an option. Jackson Powers-Johnson, maybe if they feel comfortable with the medicals. They do have Robert Hainsey, but he's going into a contract year at center. I think that could be an option. But I think another edge defender possibly could be in the books. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka has really not been the edge rusher that Bucs hoped for when they took him in the first round. He was losing snaps to Yaya Diaby last year. They lost Shaq Barrett. So I'm leaning towards defensive end, but I could see the argument for an offensive lineman, or, you know, maybe a cornerback. They did trade Carlton Davis this offseason, so I could see that too. But I think my vote would probably be at edge.
Yeah, I think JPJ would be a good fit, but Ryan Jensen just retired because of injuries too. So every injury history is different, right? Every medical evaluation is different. But looking at that, and Deion Cooper's saying pork chop, I'm all the way there. I think they would. You know, and I could be wrong, but I can see them passing on JPJ because of the injuries, because Ryan Jensen was dealing with it too at the end of his career. So I'm going to go with Chop Robinson. I think he's a phenomenal fit for Todd Bowles' scheme. Todd Bowles is a maniac with the blitz looks, right? You know, he's so good at mixing it up. But then I think Chop Robinson is a guy who has the explosion and the bend to rush from wide 9 and bend underneath the arc too. But there were games like against Iowa, right, where they had him lined up as a shaded zero tech, and he just used his lateral twitch and his power to blast right through the line on the interior and disrupt that run play too. So, you know, he's an alignment versatile game wrecker. You know, he's a maniac in pursuit. I love the upside that he has, right? I think he's got that compact speed to power profile and the bend to really disrupt from anywhere. So I think for Tampa Bay, you know, needing that kind of presence, he's very, very good value at this point. He's a top 20 player for me, and I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah. All right, let's go with him there. And just, I think they're hoping he can just be better than Shoyinka, who's just been a pretty big disappointment, I think, over these past few years. Yeah. So the Cardinals' third pick here, we can actually go and see who they've gotten. They've got Brian Thomas at wide receiver. They've gotten Jared Verse along the edge. We've talked about cornerbacks here, Ian, when we've talked about the Cardinals at other positions. Is that where you're leaning here? Nate Wiggins, Kool-Aid McKinstry are still here. Is that the way you're going for the Cardinals here at the end of round 1?
Well, yeah, we talked about it at 23. We were thinking Verse, Murphy, or Wiggins, and then we picked Verse, and now Murphy went to the Packers, so that leaves Wiggins on the top of the board, right? You could go with an interior offensive lineman if you wanted to. I think they could get a guard, but they have an early second round pick, so I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna wait until then, and we're gonna take Nate Wiggins here at corner. I think Nate Wiggins is a good scheme fit. The only concern with him is that he's not super long. He's tall, but he's got short arms, and then he's a little lighter. But I do think, you know, if you're looking for man zone flexibility, he's very good in zone coverage with his route recognition ability, his fluidity, his recovery speed. And then he's actually proven that he can match and man with disciplined feet. So I think Nate Wiggins has the recovery speed, the playmaking ability to be a really dynamic playmaker and a boundary presence for the Cardinals, and helps you move other guys around. Like you got Keitrell Clark, who can play the boundary of the slot. You've got Garrett Williams, who, you know, showed promise. Is a little volatile in year 1, but I think Nate Wiggins with his playmaking ability and dynamic speed kind of elevates the floor of that unit and allows them to play off each other. So I'm going to go with the Wiggins here.
Yeah, I like that pick. I mean, they've been desperate for cornerback help since Patrick Peterson left. I mean, that's been a huge need in Arizona, so I like that a lot. I do want to go with one question we have here about the Steelers, that the Steelers do need a center. Could you see them trading back up in the late first or early second for JPJ or Frazier? I would lean towards no, just because I'm not sure center is that premium position where you need to be trading up to get it. I think if a guy falls, I think you're fine taking him. I think center is a position where in the past you could find guys third, fourth round who can come in and be starters from day one. I do think that's possible. And I think center is also a position where you can go out and sign a free agent still. I know they released Mason Cole, but there's nothing to stop them from going and re-signing him again. They could go and re-sign any number of interior options. So I think trading up and giving away capital for a center is not something I would do or see the Steelers doing.
Yeah, I'm kind of on the fence. It's tough because in this class, you have guys like Tanner Bordellini, Hunter Norzad, Bo Limmer, who are very athletic, who you could get in the middle rounds. But I will concede. I do think there's kind of a drop off with the guys who can start right away at a high level. I think you look at that group and it's Graham Barton, it's Zach Frazier, JPJ. And then, that's kind of where it drops off a little bit, right? So Cedric Van Pran from Georgia, he's explosive, but the pad level against power can improve. So if the Steelers are really falling in love with one of those guys, I think early round 2 is where you could see them trading up. I think because they got the 48th pick. If a guy falls to like 35 or 40, right? If Zach Frazier or JPJ falls, that's where I would make the move up. Because Mason Cole, he wasn't very athletic. He wasn't very good at maintaining his pad level. I think guys like JPJ, who is explosive, right? Or Zach Frazier, who's very technically sound, either one of those would be a drastic improvement. So at a certain point, yes, I can see them trading up.
Yeah. Okay. Bills at 28. I feel like the entire world is pegged a wide receiver here after they traded Stephon Diggs and they let Gabe Davis walk. Is that the way you're leaning? I mean, it seems almost too obvious. I think they'd have to consider a receiver at this point. They have Curtis Samuel. They have some other options, but Xavier Worthy, Keon Coleman, Ladd McConkey, I think that's the way I would look. Is that the way you're leaning too, or are these options not high enough for you and it makes you want to go with a different position group?
They're good enough for sure. It's just I'm trying to figure out which wide receiver I should pick. I'm right. choosing between the two Xaviers right now, Xavier Legette and Xavier Worthy. I could go Keon Coleman too, but I'm kind of leaning towards Legette's vertical speed with Josh Allen's arm. That's kind of where I'm leaning. But then Xavier Worthy as well. I think I'm going to go with Xavier Legette here, actually. Now, he's my 43rd overall player, so this is a little bit of a reach, and I do think Worthy would be a phenomenal fit with his speed. But again, I look at the guys they have, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir, guys who are a little bit smaller catch radiuses, right? Samuel's a good underneath threat with rack and versatility. Shakir's a great slot receiver. I think you need a guy with the size to command attention on the boundary. I think that's one thing that you really need. And Xavier Legette has that for sure. And I think he dealt with adversity earlier in his career that kind of, stunted his developmental curve, but he really broke out in 2023. And 6'1", 220, the elite size speed profile is there. The hands are there. The ability to extend beyond his frame and snare really tough catches, the rack ability with the speed. And I think there were some really bright flashes of route running, particularly against zone. His blind spot awareness, he can manipulate DBs and then capitalize. He's got good stopping ability on comebacks and hitches. There's a lot of upside there, and I think he can maximize Josh Allen's vertical speed while opening up opportunities for the guys underneath. So Xavier Legette, it's a little bit of a reach, but I'm reaching because I think the prototype fit is really good with the personnel that's there.
Yeah, I think it's a really good pick. I do, and I think that I hate to be like a team that's kind of pigeonholed themselves into taking any one position, but I think that's where the Bills are at right now, that they need to get this wide receiver. So let's go with Legette. Computer's slowing down a little bit here. Let's see. Legette.
Did the draft button go away?
Guess I should hit resume draft, huh? I think I might have I think it might have crashed.
That's all good. Hey, I've got it on my
you got it written down?
Got it on my phone, so we can keep going with the final 4 picks. Yeah, if you want to.
Okay.
So we got the Lions. We got the Lions at 29, and there's actually a question about Darius Robinson, I believe, from DJ earlier in the chat, because Darius Robinson would be considered here for the Lions. Would he be a defensive tackle? I think it's situational for him. I think on running downs, you can have as a 5 tech over top of tackle. I think he can play there. I think on passing downs, that's when you can move him inside to 3 tech or 4-eye and let him rush from the interior. So I think Darius Robinson is kind of a hybrid. I liken him to a Danico Autry type of player, right? I think he can be that goblin for you alignment versatile. Just use him based on situational factors and let him unleash with that. I don't think you pigeonhole him into any specific position. But looking at what the Lions have on the board here, and I'm going to go back to my draft board here, you've got Darius Robinson for sure. You've got Jackson Powers-Johnson if you want to invest in the interior line, which Frank Ragnow had some retiring whispers, but he's chosen to come back. They have a short-term contract at guard, so they could do that. You could get Kool-Aid McKinstry as well, a corner that could be an option for you. But I just look at Darius Robinson and what he could bring to that scheme, because you've got DJ Reader, you've got Aleem McNeil, but you don't really have a 5-tech, 3-tech hybrid who can also play edge opposite Aiden Hutchinson. And we know that Darius Robinson can do that. He's got the Danico Autry profile. He's explosive, 35-inch arms, the forklift power profile. I think I'm going to go with Danico. You see, I'm already calling him that because the comp is so uncanny, man.
I know.
The physical dimensions and just the alignment versatility, that's really what pops out to me. And Danico Autry has been a very good player for a very long time, very underrated in my opinion. So
absolutely,
for the Lions,
absolutely.
You could go Xavier Worthy here if you wanted to. If you were really a maniac, you could. Ben Johnson would know how to use that. But I look at that defense and what you still need on that defensive line. You got Marcus Davenport in free agency, but he's more of a rotational guy. I'm going to go with Darius Robinson here. I really like how he fits that personnel grouping. I think he gives you exactly what you still need. So
yeah, I like that pick a lot. It seems like a really good fit for a Dan Campbell team too. I like that fit a lot. And I think that's an area they need. I mean, I know they have Aiden Hutchinson, but I think they need more depth there. I really do. And I think that makes sense. You signed Marcus Davenport, but how much are you really relying on Marcus Davenport at this point in his career? So I think that makes a lot of sense. Ravens lost a lot, maybe more than any team in the NFL this year. They've got it, 3/5 of their offensive line is gone. Morgan Moses is gone. John Simpson is gone. I think they've got a lot of holes there. They can always use a wide receiver. Odell Beckham is gone. I think basically anywhere on defense could be a fit too. I think edge they could use. They lost your Davion Clowney. You could always use more cornerback help. Who do you like here? Is it filling that offensive line gap, or is it something else for the Ravens?
Yeah, and I will say we probably don't have time for it, but this could be a point where a team like the Giants or the Raiders would trade back into the first round for Penix if they wanted to.
Yeah,
so be cognizant of that. But the Ravens, looking at what they need, they got Ronnie Stanley, who's had injury issues with left tackle. They have a void at guard, and there's one player that's still on the board that kind of fits that tackle guard hybrid profile, and that's Jordan Morgan. There's been a lot of smoke that he could be the Ravens pick. There's interest there for sure. Jordan Morgan, my comp for him, I usually don't like to use successive year comps because guys from the previous cycle are a little fresher on our minds. So naturally, that's what we affiliate. But this comp really stood out to me. Matthew Bergeron, who was coming from Syracuse, played guard as a rookie for Atlanta and played very well as a guard. I think Jordan Morgan has that same frame profile, the proportions, the high energy athleticism out of his kick, and he's got good power in his hands too. I think he's a physical finisher in the run game, but the arm length and the hand usage inconsistency and pass protection might force him inside. So I think Jordan Morgan is a guy who could play tackle if you need him to. But, at guard, I think his upside would be even more prolific. So, yeah, I think he's a little underrated too. He's a top 45 guy for me. I still think, with subpar arm length, right, there are a few hand usage inconsistencies, and that's probably what kicks him inside to guard for me. But I do think he has the recovery athleticism to stick at tackle, and he recovered from a torn ACL, without missing a beat. He didn't lose any of his mobility, so that was good to see. But I'm going to go with him for the Ravens here. I think he gives you the tackle guard flex, and he's got upside at both spots.
Yeah, I like that. So you would take him over Guyton, even if Guyton is still on the board here. You would take Morgan?
Not necessarily. I think you could take either one, but for this particular mock draft, I'm going to go with Morgan because he's got that guard versatility. So you can play him at guard right away, or you can maybe kick him out to right tackle if you want. Tyler Guyton is more of a tackle who doesn't really translate to guard. You're probably putting him right at right tackle, and there's going to be some lumps early on for him. I think, with the hand usage, but, I think Jordan Morgan's a little bit better in that department. Even though he's got room to improve, I think he's a little bit better. I think he's a tier above. So that tackle guard flex is really kind of what sold it for me.
And the Ravens, they do have Patrick McCarry, and they drafted Daniel Falele last year. So they've got tackle options. So I think it makes sense to get a guy who can play guard too.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I think San Francisco here at 31, we're talking about the same type of thing. It's, an offensive line that it's the same offensive line from last year, but I think they could make upgrades. They signed right tackle Colton McKivitz to a 1-year extension, but they could upgrade there. I think they could upgrade at guard. They could upgrade at center over Jake Brindell. I think they could also use a cornerback though. I think that, they're looking for that cornerback to play opposite Travarius Ward. Lenore is more of a slot option, I think. And Charvarius Ward, don't look now, but he's only got 1 year left in his contract. So I think that's a position they could go as well. Well, what about you? Are you leaning in any particular direction here at 31?
You could go corner and you could go tackle as well. Tyler Guyton could be a really good option for you here because, again, he's a right tackle. Colton McKivitz is not the long-term answer. And I think generally from their right tackle, like when they drafted Mike McGlinchey, they like guys who are a little bigger, a little taller, and have that size and length to, wash over rushers. So Guyton is standing out to me. It's between Guyton and McKinstry because McKinstry is a phenomenal value here. I can't believe he's still on the board. He's very good in zone, which they run a lot of, but he can play man too. I'm going to go with McKinstry. I would love to get that right tackle, but the value is just too good at corner. McKinstry is a top 20 player for me. He has that suffocating man ability, but then his route recognition, fluidity in zone, his pedal, just a smooth player, really high level guy who can play boundary. He, ideally you could project him in the slot a little bit, not quite as much as Terrion Arnold, but I do think he has all of the tools to move there if needed. So boundary, really high level player, really savvy and run support too. He's just too good a value for me to pass up for San Francisco here.
I think he'll give them a lot of flexibility in the back end, I think too. I think that makes a lot of sense. So we've reached the final pick here with the Kansas City Chiefs. They don't have a left tackle if the season started today. As far as, unless I missed it, Donovan Smith has not been re-signed. So I think that's a vacancy unless you're a true Wanya Morris believer. I don't know if you are, Ian, or not. Wide receiver, I think, is obviously a need too. They signed Marquise Brown, but Rashee Rice is dealing with some legal troubles at the moment. And even if that weren't happening, I think wide receiver could potentially be an option if the Chiefs wanted to go here. What does that mean? They would go after Alad McConkey, a separation specialist, now that they have Marquise Brown as a deep guy and Rashee Rice is kind of their yards after catch guy, maybe, where they go with a Keon Coleman, maybe. And then so Tyler Guyton still is available here, right? So he could be an option if you think he could play left tackle for them eventually. Maybe they move Jawan Taylor over to left tackle. That's what the Chiefs were talking about doing last year. So there are options here, but there are some obvious needs I think the Chiefs could go with.
Yeah, for sure. I was thinking about moving Jawan Taylor to left tackle because I wouldn't want to move Tyler Guyton that early in his career. I wanted to stick a right tackle where he's already comfortable and just let him grow there. So that's at the top of my mind. But, and we're seeing comments about Lad's still on the board. Lad's there, Lad in that scheme. What I think about for the Chiefs in particular, right? With the Rashee Rice situation hanging over everyone's head is reliability, right? You want someone who's reliable, and Lad McConkey is very reliable, right? He's a very good athlete. He proved that with the testing, but I think what really wins over evaluators when they watch his film is the route running ability, right? The change of direction, the head fakes, the intentional movement, right? The ability to separate with a full tree from any alignment, movement Z, slot, right? Off motions too. So I think that alignment versatility is something that plays right into Andy Reid's hand, where he can scheme guys open any way possible. He can win over the middle of the field, and Lad's got strong hands, very good composure at the catch point. I don't think he's that elite tracker on the vertical plane, but he's got the speed to threaten in that phase too. So I think that reliability, that chain moving ability, that all-around versatility. And Jalen Polk from Washington is another sleeper that I'll throw out there because he's a top 40 guy for me, and I like him a lot, and I think he fit that too. But for the Chiefs in this simulation, let's go with the evil empire scenario. Let's go with them getting Lad and getting that weapon who can, play all three levels, who can be that alignment versatile force and gives them that reliability that they need while also providing dynamic upside.
I like that pick a lot. And it's, I think offensive tackle is still a hole, but as long as Donovan Smith is still out there, he's always an option for you. You're not finding a receiver out there at this point. So I think if you want to add another guy, that's where it could be. That's our draft. I know we kind of crashed out here at the end, but I'll redo it so we can get the full kind of scope of what we've done here. We'll post it on social media. That was a lot of fun. Doing this mock draft. I think anyone at home that wants to do their own mock drafts, please come to PFN, use the mock draft simulator. We've got another week and a day here to do all the mock drafts you want. And then as soon as round one is over, correct me if I'm wrong, Ian, but we will automatically have the MDS ready for day 2, right? If you want to start doing mock drafts on day 2. And as soon as day 3 is over, it shifts over to 2025. So this does not stop. The MDS is 24/7, 365, whatever year you're doing, you can do mock drafts at all times. So do come check that out. Ian, this was great. So much information, I think, going over these prospects. And this is frankly how, as someone who comes to this process late, this is how I kind of catch up is doing these drafts and reading these scouting reports that Ian has in here. And you can click on the full reports down here and get even more detail. So between the gamification of doing this and learning about it, and also just reading the excellent analysis that Ian and the rest of our draft team has had, it is just an excellent tool that I am using every single day for my work and for my enjoyment, for everything. So please come use this MDS as much as you can over the next week or so.
Yeah, and I'll just closing thoughts here too. I see Walt's claiming for round 2. I'd love to, Walt. I'd love to, but we've run over 2 hours. We're gonna pause it here. But hey, if you want to do your own, you can fire up the MDS on your own, do a 2-rounder, and hey, at IC_draft, that's where you can find me on X or Twitter. If you want to send your mock to me or just ask me questions, you can always hit me up there. So this was a fun one. This was great, and we've only got 7 days left. We got 8, but it's gonna be 7 tomorrow, a week before the NFL draft. So make sure you fire up the MDS, go through the outcomes, different possibilities. And just keep going through it, because we got a limited amount of time. Soon we're going to know what happens, and that's no fun, right? So, going through the possibilities, the outcomes, that's the best part of this. So let's make the use of the time that we have left and get it done.
Speculation is the best part. Once it actually happens, yeah, you're right. It's all over. What's the fun in that? Thanks everyone for listening. Thanks for all the comments. Please check out Pro Football Network for all your draft needs. Thanks again.